The highway stretched before her like a promise she wasn't sure she wanted to keep. Sarah Mitchell gripped the steering wheel of her father's old Ford F-150, the same truck that had sat in her grandmother's garage for 16 years, collecting dust and memories she'd refused to claim. The Wyoming landscape rolled past in shades of brown and gold, vast and empty in that particular way that makes a person feel both insignificant and strangely free. November snow threatened from clouds the color of old pewter, and the radio played a Merle Haggard song her father used to hum while cleaning his rifle on Sunday mornings. 28 years old, and Sarah was finally ready to meet a ghost. The truck's odometer read 243,000 miles. Her father had driven most of those miles, shuttling between Fort Benning and whatever Middle Eastern desert the Army had sent him to next. She could still see him in the driver's seat if she let herself, hands at 10 and 2, back straight as a parade ground flagpole, eyes always scanning for threats that never materialized on these peaceful American roads. Sergeant Tom Mitchell, Army Ranger, had survived 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, only to die on a dusty road outside Kandahar in 2009, saving 4 men from an IED that should have killed them all. Sarah had been 12 years old. She hadn't gone to the funeral. The memory sat in her chest like something sharp and cold even now. She'd stood in her bedroom while her mother sobbed downstairs, staring at her father's dress uniform hanging on the back of her door, and she'd made a decision. A child's decision, born of hurt and confusion and the particular rage that comes from losing someone you love to something you don't understand. She would not cry for a man who chose strangers over his own daughter. She would not stand beside that flag-draped coffin and listen to rifle volleys and taps while old men told her that her father died a hero. Heroes came home, but children grow up, and sometimes they become the very thing they swore they'd never be. 8 years in the Navy, 6 of them as a SEAL after she'd clawed her way through Bud/S training in Class 315, proving to every man who doubted that women belonged anywhere a warrior needed to be. She'd done it partly to understand him, partly to punish herself for the years of anger, and partly because violence turned out to be the only language she spoke fluently. 4 deployments, 17 confirmed kills, a chest full of medals she kept in a shoebox under her bed because looking at them made her feel like a fraud. She'd gotten out 6 months ago and she still didn't know who she was without the uniform. The GPS showed another 40 miles to Cedar Ridge National Cemetery, where her father's body had been laid to rest beside other warriors who'd given what Lincoln called the last full measure of devotion. Sarah had never visited, not once in 16 years, but something had broken loose inside her 3 weeks ago. Sitting in her empty apartment in San Diego, staring at the pistol she kept loaded on her nightstand for reasons that had nothing to do with home defense, she'd picked up her phone instead and booked a flight to Montana, rented this truck from her grandmother's estate, started driving north with no clear plan beyond finally saying the words she should have said when she was 12 years old. "I'm sorry, Dad, I understand now." The Hollow Creek exit appeared like an answered prayer. Sarah's bladder was screaming, and her back ached from 7 hours behind the wheel. The town looked like every other dying Montana settlement she'd passed through. One main street, half the storefronts empty, a grain elevator standing sentinel against the darkening sky. A faded billboard promised the world's best huckleberry pie at some place called Mercy's Diner, and Sarah found herself following the signs, drawn by hunger and the need to be around human beings who weren't ghosts. She pulled into the gravel parking lot at 7:15. The diner squatted low and solid, a relic from the 50s with chrome trim and wide windows glowing warm against the gathering cold. 3 other vehicles sat in the lot, a new Cadillac Escalade that seemed wildly out of place, a rusted Dodge pickup that looked like it had survived since Eisenhower, and a sheriff's cruiser parked at an angle that suggested the driver had been in a hurry. Sarah killed the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the tick of cooling metal. Through the diner's window, she could see movement, the ordinary ballet of people eating dinner, unaware they were being watched. For just a second, she let herself imagine walking in there and being normal, ordering coffee and pie, making small talk with the waitress, pretending she was just another traveler passing through, not a woman haunted by the men she'd killed and the father she'd failed. The wind bit when she stepped out, carrying the promise of snow and the smell of burning wood from somewhere nearby. Sarah zipped her father's old leather jacket, the one her grandmother had saved for her, still carrying the faint ghost of his cologne mixed with gun oil and desert sand. The jacket fit her perfectly. That seemed cosmically unfair somehow. The diner's door jangled when she pushed it open, a cheerful sound at odds with the tension she felt the moment she crossed the threshold. Years of training had honed her instincts to read rooms the way scholars read books, cataloging threats and exits, and the subtle wrongness that meant violence was brewing beneath the surface of civilian normalcy. This room had that wrongness. She could taste it. A handful of customers scattered among the red vinyl booths. An elderly couple by the window hunched over their food like they were guarding it. Two men at the counter, both wearing the kind of expensive casual clothes that screamed money, trying to look relaxed. And in the corner booth, three more men, loud and loose in the way that comes from alcohol and the certainty that no one will tell them no. Sarah chose a booth halfway down the far wall, positioning herself with her back to the corner and clear sight lines to both exits. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive when the world decided to go sideways. The waitress appeared almost immediately, and Sarah felt something twist in her chest. The girl couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, pretty in that fresh-faced way that life hadn't yet touched with real cruelty. But there was something in her eyes, a wariness that Sarah recognized from the mirror. This girl had already learned that the world contained monsters. Coffee? The waitress's voice was soft, practiced, the kind of professional friendly that kept tips coming and conversations shallow. Please, black, and whatever's good tonight. Meatloaf's fresh, comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. Sounds perfect. The girl nodded and turned away, and Sarah watched her walk toward the kitchen, noting the slight hitch in her step, the way her shoulders tensed as she passed the booth with the three loud men. One of them said something Sarah couldn't quite hear, and the girl's spine went rigid. She didn't respond, just kept walking. Sarah pulled out her phone, pretending to scroll through messages while she observed. The two men at the counter were deep in conversation, their voices low and serious. Both in their 40s, both carrying themselves with the coiled readiness of people who knew how to hurt others. Ex-military, maybe, or cops. The three in the corner booth were different. They had the predatory ease of men who'd never faced real consequences. The loudest one, heavy-set with graying hair and a gold Rolex catching the light, seemed to be their leader. His voice carried across the diner like he owned every word that left his mouth. Emily, sweetheart, bring us another round when you get a chance. The waitress, Emily, moved to acknowledge him with a slight nod. No smile, no warmth, just the minimum required to do her job without inviting further attention. The kitchen door swung open and a man emerged, and Sarah felt every nerve ending in her body snap to full alert. He was old, late 60s at least, but he moved with the deliberate precision of someone whose body remembered younger days, when speed and violence were survival skills. Tall and lean, with iron gray hair, cut military short, and eyes that swept the room with the same cataloging instinct Sarah had used when she entered. He wore a white apron over jeans and a faded denim shirt, but the apron might as well have been camouflage. This was a warrior pretending to be a civilian. Their eyes met across the diner, and something passed between them. Recognition, not of faces but of kind. The way wolves know other wolves. The man's gaze lingered on her for just a second too long, and Sarah saw the question forming behind his eyes. Then he looked away, moving behind the counter to pour coffee for the elderly couple. Sarah's own coffee arrived moments later, along with her meal. Emily set the plates down with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the tremor Sarah could see in her shoulders. Thank you. You're welcome. Let me know if you need anything else. The girl started to turn away, but Sarah spoke before she could stop herself. You okay? Emily froze, and for just a second her mask slipped. Fear flickered across her face, raw and immediate, before the professional smile snapped back into place. I'm fine, thank you for asking. She walked away before Sarah could press, and Sarah mentally kicked herself. Not your business, not your fight, you're just passing through. But the words felt hollow even as she thought them, because she'd spent 8 years learning that every fight became your business when you were the only one in the room who could end it. She ate slowly, letting the hot food settle her nerves while she watched the room's dynamics play out. The three men in the corner booth grew louder with each passing minute, their conversations shifting from jovial to aggressive. The old man behind the counter watched them with the focused attention of someone monitoring a growing storm. The elderly couple finished their meal and left quickly, the woman glancing nervously at the corner booth as they hurried out. Sarah was halfway through her meatloaf when the door jangled again and two more men entered. These two were different from the others. Polished, professional, the kind of dangerous that wore three-piece suits and smiled while they ruined your life. They joined the three in the corner booth, and the volume in the diner increased immediately. 5 men now, all of them radiating the particular arrogance that comes from power unchecked. Emily approached their table with a fresh pot of coffee, and Sarah watched the interaction with growing unease. The heavy-set man with the Rolex reached out as Emily poured, his hand brushing her wrist in a touch that was definitely not accidental. Emily flinched but didn't pull away. Just finished pouring and stepped back, her face carefully blank. "Emily, honey, you're looking especially pretty tonight." Rolex's voice carried across the diner, meant to be heard, meant to establish dominance. "Thank you, Mr. Kane." Emily's voice was barely above a whisper. "Vincent, how many times do I have to tell you to call me Vincent?" "I'm sorry, sir, Vincent." One of the newcomers, a man in an expensive gray suit with the kind of haircut that cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, leaned back in his seat. "Vincent, maybe you should give the girl a break. She's clearly busy." Vincent Kane laughed, a sound without humor. "Marcus, always the gentleman. That's why you're the sheriff, right? Protecting and serving?" "Sheriff." Sarah's mind filed that information away, along with the way Marcus smiled at the comment. Not a real smile, a politician's smile, the kind that said he'd made deals he wasn't proud of and learned to live with it. The old man emerged from the kitchen again, and this time Sarah saw tension in every line of his body. He moved toward the corner booth with slow, deliberate steps, and Sarah found herself shifting in her seat, preparing for violence she hoped wouldn't come, but knew was inevitable. "Gentlemen," the old man's voice was graveled but steady, "you're disturbing my other customers. I'm going to have to ask you to keep it down." Vincent Kane looked up at him with eyes gone flat and cold. "Frank Morrison, or should I say Colonel Morrison, how's retirement treating you?" The old man, Frank Morrison, didn't react, didn't flinch, just stood there with the patience of someone who'd faced down worse threats than drunk men in a diner. "It's treating me fine, Vincent. Now please, lower your voices or take it outside." One of the men at this booth stood up, and Sarah's threat assessment went from yellow to red in an instant. This one was big, 6'4" at least, with the build of someone who spent serious time in the gym. Military tattoos covered his forearms, Marine Corps emblems mixed with unit insignias Sarah recognized from her own deployments. But there was something off about him, something in the way he carried himself that spoke of dishonor. "Colonel Morrison." The big man's voice dripped with mockery. "Been a long time, sir." Frank's posture changed, subtle but unmistakable. He'd recognized a threat. "Derek Stone, I heard you were back in the area." "Oh, you heard right. Heard you were running this little grease pit now. Quite a come down from commanding rangers, don't you think?" The air in the diner had gone electric. Emily had retreated behind the counter, her face pale. The two men who'd been sitting at the counter had turned to watch, their body language shifting to ready. And Sarah found herself calculating angles and distances, her body remembering training even as her mind screamed that this wasn't her problem. Frank Morrison looked at Derek Stone with the kind of calm that only comes from seeing death up close enough times to stop fearing it. "I like my grease pit just fine, son. Now sit down before you do something you'll regret." Derek laughed, and it was the sound of broken glass. "Regret? You want to talk about regret, old man? You want to talk about how you testified against me? How you got me drummed out of the Corps, cost me my pension, my benefits, my whole goddamn future?" The pieces clicked together in Sarah's mind. Court-martial. Conduct unbecoming. Whatever Derek Stone had done, Frank Morrison had been there to witness it, had done his duty. And Derek Stone had spent however many years since then nursing a grudge that had fermented into something poisonous. Frank's voice didn't waver. "You got yourself drummed out, son. I just told the truth about what I saw in Fallujah, about those civilians you murdered." The word hung in the air like smoke. Murdered. Not killed in the fog of war, not casualties of combat. Murdered. Derek's face went red, veins bulging in his neck. Those Hajis were enemy combatants. Everyone knew it. They were a family, Derek, a mother and 3 children, and you shot them in cold blood because you were angry. Vincent Kane stood up now, placing a hand on Derek's shoulder. "Easy, Derek. The colonel here is just trying to provoke you, probably hoping you'll give him an excuse to play hero one more time." Vincent turned his attention to Frank. But that's not going to happen. Because the colonel knows that I own this town now. Isn't that right, Morrison? Frank met Vincent's eyes without blinking. You don't own anything but your own corruption, Kane. Big words from a man standing alone. Vincent gestured around the diner. Where are your backup forces, Colonel? Your loyal troops? All I see is an old man running a failing diner in the middle of nowhere, pretending he still matters. Sarah felt her hands curl into fists beneath the table. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene, to stand up and shift the odds, to do what she'd been trained to do. But this wasn't Syria or Afghanistan. This was America. This was supposed to be safe, and she was supposed to be learning how to live without violence. The moment stretched tight enough to break. Frank Morrison stood his ground, alone against 5 men, and Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes. Not whether he could win. A man his age against 5 younger opponents had no illusions about winning, but whether the fight was worth having, whether the principle was worth the price. Emily's voice cut through the tension, small and frightened. Please, everyone, just calm down. There's no need for trouble. Vincent's attention snapped to her like a predator scenting prey. No need for trouble? Sweet Emily thinks there's no need for trouble. He took a step toward her. Emily, darling, you and I need to have a conversation about that rent you owe me, about the other debts you've accumulated. Emily backed up until she hit the counter, trapped. I told you I'll have the money by Monday. Monday's not good enough. I think we need to work out a different payment plan. Something more immediate, more personal. Frank moved then, stepping between Vincent and Emily, and Sarah saw 50 years of warrior training in that simple movement. Positioning, protection, the instinct to shield the vulnerable even when outnumbered and outgunned. Step away from her, Kane. Vincent smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd forgotten what consequences felt like. Or what, Colonel? You going to assault a civilian? You going to add that to your distinguished service record? I'm going to defend my employee from harassment. Harassment? Vincent laughed. Sheriff Dalton, am I harassing anyone here? Marcus, the sheriff, stood up slowly, his hand resting on his service weapon in a casual gesture that was anything but casual. Looks like a civil conversation to me. Colonel Morrison, I think you should step back and let Mr. Kane conduct his business. Sarah watched Frank's shoulders tighten, saw the moment when he realized that the law wasn't on his side, that whatever power Vincent Kane wielded in this town extended into the sheriff's office, that he was truly alone. But he didn't move. This is my restaurant, and I'm asking you all to leave. Derek Stone cracked his knuckles, the sound loud in the sudden silence. You're asking us to leave? That's funny, Colonel. That's real funny. He moved fast for a big man, faster than Frank could react at 68 years old with arthritis in his knees and old shrapnel in his back. Derek's hand shot out and grabbed Frank's shirt, yanking the older man close. How about I ask you something, old man? How about I ask if you remember Sergeant Chen? Remember how he died because of your orders? Remember how you came home and he stayed there in the sand? Frank's face went white, and Sarah saw something break behind his eyes. Old pain, old guilt. The kind that never heals no matter how many years pass. Chen's death wasn't my fault. It was enemy fire. Was it? Or was it because you froze, because you hesitated, because you were too old and too slow even back then? The accusation hung in the air, and Sarah saw Frank Morrison's hands start to shake, not from fear, from rage and grief and the terrible weight of survivor's guilt that every combat veteran carried like invisible shrapnel. Sarah stood up. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. Her body just moved, rising from the booth with the fluid certainty that came from 8 years of training and 4 deployments worth of muscle memory. Every eye in the diner swung to her, and Sarah felt the familiar cold clarity that came over her in combat. The world slowing down, details sharpening, heart rate dropping to 50 beats per minute, while her mind calculated threats and responses with mechanical precision. Let him go. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Derek Stone looked at her, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into contempt. This doesn't concern you, lady. Sarah took 2 steps toward them, her body language shifting almost imperceptibly from civilian to operator. Shoulders back, weight balanced, hands loose at her sides, but ready. I'm making it my concern. Vincent Kane studied her with the kind of attention predators give to potential threats. Who the hell are you? Someone who doesn't like bullies. Derek laughed and released Frank, turning his full attention to Sarah. Up close, he was even bigger, probably 240 pounds of gym-sculpted muscle. The kind of man who'd spent his life using his size to intimidate people. The kind who'd never faced anyone who could actually hurt him. You're cute. I like the tough girl act, but you should sit down before you get hurt. Sarah didn't move, didn't blink, just looked up at Derek Stone with the same calm she'd shown Taliban fighters in Helmand province. Last chance, walk away. Marcus, the sheriff, stood up now, his hand moving to his weapon. Ma'am, I don't know who you are or what you're doing in Hollow Creek, but you need to stand down right now. These men are conducting legal business. Sarah finally looked at Marcus, and she let him see what she was. Let him see the years of violence and death and training that had forged her into something that wore a human face but operated on different rules. Legal business? Is that what you call threatening a young woman? Assaulting an elderly veteran? I call it none of your concern. Now sit down or I'll arrest you for disturbing the peace. The absurdity almost made her laugh. Disturbing the peace. She'd disturbed the peace of warlords and terrorist cells in entire enemy compounds. She'd crept through the darkness with a rifle and night vision and the authority of the United States government to rain down holy hell on anyone who threatened American lives. And this small-town sheriff thought he could intimidate her with the threat of arrest. Frank Morrison's voice was barely a whisper. Miss, please, don't do this. They're not worth it. Sarah glanced at him and saw defeat in his eyes. The kind of defeat that comes from fighting too long against impossible odds. From standing alone for so long that you forget what backup feels like. And in that moment, looking at this old warrior who'd probably saved more lives than she ever would, who'd served his country with honor and asked nothing in return except the chance to live out his years in peace, Sarah made a decision. The same decision she'd made every time she'd volunteered for a mission no one else wanted. The same decision that had put her in harm's way 17 times with a rifle in her hands and a target in her sights. The decision that said some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds were bad and the cost was high. I'm not going anywhere. Derek Stone's face hardened. Okay, you want to play hero? Let's see how that works out for you. He reached for her, his massive hand grabbing for her shoulder, and Sarah moved. Not the wild, instinctive movement of someone panicking, but the precise, economical motion of someone who'd spent thousands of hours drilling this exact scenario. Her left hand intercepted his wrist, fingers finding the nerve cluster that would send electric pain up his arm. Simultaneously, her right hand struck his elbow joint with just enough force to hyperextend it. Not enough to break, but enough to make his entire arm go numb. Derek gasped and dropped to one knee, shock and pain warring on his face. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. The diner erupted into chaos. Vincent Kane lunged forward, and Sarah's training screamed warnings about multiple attackers and changing threat vectors. But before Vincent could reach her, Frank Morrison stepped in his path, and suddenly the old man didn't look so old anymore. Didn't look defeated or broken or ready to quit. He looked like what he was, a warrior who'd forgotten for just a moment that he still had fight left in him. Frank's fist caught Vincent square in the jaw, a textbook right cross that sent the bigger man stumbling backward into a table. Coffee cups shattered, silverware scattered across the floor in a bright metallic rain. Marcus drew his weapon, the sheriff's service pistol, coming up to point at Sarah's chest. Freeze! Both of you, freeze right now! Sarah released Derek and stepped back, hands rising slowly, showing empty palms. But her eyes never left Marcus, and she was already calculating. Distance, 12 feet, angle of fire, center mass, standard law enforcement protocol. Response time if he pulled the trigger, 0.8 seconds for the bullet to reach her, not enough time to dodge, but maybe enough to deflect if she moved right now. She didn't move. Frank stood over Vincent Kane, breathing hard, his knuckles already swelling. Emily's voice small and terrified. Please stop. Everyone just stop. The moment hung suspended, balanced on the edge of violence that could still tip either way. Sarah could see Marcus's finger on the trigger, saw the uncertainty in his eyes. He didn't want to shoot, didn't want to cross that line, but he would if he felt threatened enough. And Sarah knew that men with badges and guns made bad decisions when their authority got challenged. Then from the corner booth, a slow clap. Everyone turned to look at the fifth man, the one who'd been sitting quietly while chaos erupted around him. He was older than the others, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it smiled for a living. He stood up, still clapping, his movements relaxed and almost amused. Well, this has been quite the show. Vincent, I told you that temper would get you in trouble someday. He looked at Sarah with interest that felt clinical, evaluating. And you, young lady, have quite the skill set. Military? Sarah didn't answer. The man smiled. Of course, military. Let me guess. Army? No, wrong energy. Marines? No, you're too controlled. Special operations? His eyes narrowed. Navy has to be Navy, which means SEAL because the regular Navy doesn't produce women who can take down Derek Stone like he's a training dummy. Sarah kept her face neutral, but inside she was recalculating everything. This man was different from the others. Smarter. More dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with physical strength. I'm Richard Cross, the man continued, and I think we've all gotten off on the wrong foot here. Sheriff Dalton, lower your weapon. No one's going to shoot anyone tonight. Marcus hesitated, then slowly holstered his pistol. Sarah could see relief in his eyes, mixed with resentment at being given orders by a civilian. Richard Cross walked towards Sarah with the confidence of someone who'd never been physically threatened in his life. Miss, I apologize for my associates' behavior. They can be crude. But Vincent here does have a legitimate grievance with Miss Emily regarding unpaid debts. And Colonel Morrison, well, he has a history of inserting himself into situations that don't concern him. Frank Morrison's voice was cold. It concerns me when someone threatens my employee in my restaurant. Your restaurant? Richard smiled. That's interesting, because I seem to recall that Vincent holds the mortgage on this property, which makes him, in a sense, your landlord, which makes this his property as much as yours. The words landed like body blows, and Sarah saw Frank's face go pale. He hadn't known, or hadn't wanted to know. Richard turned back to Sarah. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to finish your meal and leave. Colonel Morrison is going to return to his kitchen. Emily is going to have a private conversation with Vincent about her debts. And we're all going to forget this unfortunate misunderstanding ever happened. Sarah looked at Emily, saw the terror in her eyes, and knew with absolute certainty that if she walked away now, something terrible would happen to that girl. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow. But definitely, inevitably, because these men were predators and Emily was prey, and that's how the natural order worked when good people did nothing. Her father's voice echoed in memory. Words he'd spoken to her when she was 8 years old, and some bully at school had been picking on a smaller kid. Sarah, you know what separates us from the bad guys. We stand up. Even when it's hard, even when it costs us. We stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. That's what makes us the good guys. She'd forgotten that for a long time. Forgotten it in the anger after his death. Remembered it only when she'd put on the uniform and learned that her father had been right about so many things she'd been too young and too angry to understand. Sarah looked Richard Cross in the eye. No. The single word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water, ripples spreading outward. Richard's smile didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. I beg your pardon. I said no, Emily's not going anywhere with you, and you're all leaving. Now. Vincent Kane struggled to his feet, his jaw already swelling purple. You stupid bitch. Do you have any idea who you're messing with? Sarah's voice stayed level. I know exactly who I'm messing with. 5 men who think they can do whatever they want because no one's ever told them no. Well, I'm telling you no. Derek Stone had recovered enough to stand, cradling his injured arm. You got lucky once, you won't get lucky again. Sarah felt the familiar calm settling over her, the same emotional flatline that came before combat. Fear turned off, doubt turned off, nothing but tactical assessment in the cold mathematics of violence. It wasn't luck. Richard Cross studied her for a long moment, and Sarah could almost see him recalculating his approach. This wasn't going according to his plan. The small-town intimidation tactics weren't working on someone who'd faced down actual enemies with actual weapons in actual war zones. You know what I think? Richard's voice was thoughtful. I think you're someone who's used to being the toughest person in the room. Someone who's fought real fights and thinks that makes you invincible. But this isn't whatever desert you crawled out of. This is America. This is civilization. And in civilization, force doesn't win. Money wins, power wins, and we have both. He gestured to Marcus. Sheriff Dalton, please explain to this young woman the consequences of assault and battery. Marcus cleared his throat. Ma'am, you assaulted Mr. Stone. I witnessed it. I can arrest you right now and you'll spend the night in lockup. Probably get charged with felony assault. That SEAL career you're so proud of, that'll look real good on your record. Sarah felt the trap closing. They were right. She'd thrown the first real punch. technically speaking. In a court of law, she was the aggressor, and these men had money and influence and a sheriff in their pocket. They could make her life very difficult. But they'd missed something crucial about her, something she'd learned in 8 years of operating in places where the rules were written in blood and survival went to whoever was willing to go furthest. She didn't care about her record anymore. Frank Morrison's voice cut through her thoughts. Wait. Everyone turned to look at the old colonel. He stood straighter now, and Sarah could see him making the same calculations she'd just made. The same decision to stop retreating, to plant his feet and hold the line one more time. You want to arrest someone, Marcus? Arrest me. I threw a punch at Vincent. That's assault. Take me in. Vincent Kane laughed. Finally grew a spine, Morrison. Too little, too late. Frank ignored him, keeping his eyes on Sarah. Miss, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is my fight. Has been for a long time. You should go. Get out of this town and forget you ever stopped here. Sarah looked at this old warrior, this man who'd probably saved more lives than she ever would, who'd served with honor and asked for nothing, and she saw something she recognized. She saw her father. Not literally. Frank Morrison and Tom Mitchell had been different men, different branches, different wars, but they shared something essential. That bone-deep conviction that some things were worth standing for, that you didn't abandon your post even when the position was overrun, that you held the line because that's what warriors did. And in that moment, Sarah understood why she'd really come to Wyoming, not just to visit a grave, not just to apologize to a dead man who couldn't hear her, but to find out if she was her father's daughter in the ways that mattered, if she'd inherited more than his jacket and his truck, if she'd inherited his spine. She stepped up beside Frank Morrison, shoulder to shoulder. With respect, Colonel, this isn't just your fight anymore. Frank looked at her, surprise and something like pride flickering in his eyes. You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you're a ranger. I know you stood up for what was right even when it cost you. And I know my father would have done the same thing. Your father? Sergeant Tom Mitchell, Army Rangers, KIA Afghanistan, 2009. Frank's face went still. Tom Mitchell was your father? You knew him? Knew him? I served with him. I was his commanding officer in '08 before my last deployment. Frank's voice roughened. Tom was a good man, one of the best soldiers I ever had the honor to lead. The room seemed to tilt sideways. Sarah grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. You knew my father? I did. And he talked about you all the time. Showed me pictures. Was so damn proud of his little girl. Frank's eyes were wet now. He died saving 4 men, including me, pushed me out of the way of that IED and took the blast himself. The words hit Sarah like physical blows. Her father had died saving Frank Morrison. This man standing beside her was alive because Tom Mitchell had made a split-second decision to value someone else's life over his own. The mathematics of heroism, the algebra of sacrifice. Everything crystallized in that moment. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. This was the universe giving her an opportunity to honor her father's memory in the only way that mattered. Not by visiting a grave, not by crying over a flag, but by standing beside the man her father had died to save and finishing the fight. Sarah looked at Vincent Kane and his 4 companions with new eyes. Last chance, leave quietly or I make you leave. Richard Cross shook his head slowly. Such a waste. You could have walked away clean. Now you're going to leave here in handcuffs or a body bag. Derek Stone cracked his neck, the sound like breaking kindling. I vote body bag. Vincent Kane pulled out his cell phone. I'm calling in the rest of the boys. By the time they get here, you 2 are going to wish you'd taken the deal. Emily's voice small and broken. Please don't do this. Not because of me. I'm not worth it. Sarah turned to look at the young waitress. This girl who'd been terrorized for so long, she'd started to believe she deserved it. Yes, you are. Frank Morrison moved to stand on Sarah's other side, forming a line. 2 against 5, with more on the way. Terrible odds, probably impossible odds. The kind of odds that got people killed. Frank's voice was quiet, meant only for Sarah. You know we're probably not walking out of here. I know. And you're staying anyway. I'm staying. Your father would be proud. Sarah felt something break loose in her chest. Some dam she'd built 16 years ago, when she decided that anger was easier than grief. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. I hope so. Frank reached under the counter and pulled out an old M1911 pistol, the kind that dated back to the first Gulf War. He checked the magazine with practiced efficiency, chambered around. I swore I'd never pick this up again. Swore I was done with violence. We don't get to choose when violence finds us, Colonel. We just choose how we respond. Frank looked at the pistol in his hand, then at Sarah, then at Emily huddled behind the counter. Sarah could see the calculation in his eyes, the same one she'd made. Some things were worth fighting for. Some lines couldn't be allowed to move. He nodded slowly. Okay then, let's make it count. Vincent Kane's phone chimed. He looked at the screen and smiled. 3 minutes. My boys will be here in 3 minutes. That's how long you have to change your minds. Richard Cross moved toward the door, Derek and the other two following. Marcus hesitated, torn between his badge and his payday, before following them out. Only Vincent remained, standing in the doorway like a promise of violence yet to come. I'm going to enjoy this, Vincent said. I'm going to enjoy watching Derek break you both. Going to enjoy listening to Emily scream when we're done with you. And then I'm going to burn this shithole diner to the ground and build something worthwhile on the ashes. Frank's voice was steady as stone. You're going to have to come through me first. Vincent laughed. Old man, I've been coming through you for 5 years. You just didn't know it. Every piece of information you thought you were sending to the FBI. I intercepted it. Every bit of evidence you collected, I destroyed it. You've been fighting a war you already lost. The words hit Frank like body shots, and Sarah saw something crumble behind his eyes. 5 years. 5 years of risk and sacrifice and hope, all for nothing. All wasted because the system he'd trusted was rotten from the inside. But Sarah had learned a long time ago that sometimes the system failed. Sometimes the rules broke down and the good guys lost, and justice was just a word people used to sleep better at night. And when that happened, when civilization's veneer cracked and revealed the chaos underneath, the only thing that mattered was who was willing to stand in the gap, who was willing to hold the line even when the line was already breaking. Vincent left, the door swinging shut behind him, and the diner fell silent except for Emily's quiet sobbing and the tick of the old clock on the wall marking seconds until violence arrived. Frank Morrison stood with his father's pistol in hand, an old soldier called to one more fight. Sarah Mitchell stood beside him, her father's daughter at last, ready to honor his memory the only way she knew how. And somewhere in the darkness, 5 men gathered their forces, confident in their numbers and their power, completely unaware that sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world is someone with nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The 3 minutes felt like 3 hours. Sarah stood in the center of Mercy's diner, her body remembering drills she'd run 1,000 times in 100 different configurations. Active shooter scenarios, hostage rescue, close quarters battle in confined spaces with limited cover and civilians in the line of fire. Every SEAL operator trained for this, prepared for the moment when violence stopped being theoretical and became as real as breathing. But those drills had always assumed backup was coming, that she was part of a team, brothers in arms who'd breach the door with flashbangs and coordinated fire, who'd clear rooms with practiced efficiency while she covered angles and called out threats. This was different. This was 2 against God knew how many, in a building with windows on 3 sides and exactly 1 exit that wasn't a death trap. Frank Morrison moved behind the counter with surprising speed for a man his age, returning moments later with a battered green ammo can that looked like it had survived since his Ranger days. He set it on the nearest table and popped it open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were 2 more pistols and 6 loaded magazines. I kept telling myself these were just souvenirs, Frank said, his voice rough, that I'd never need them again, that those days were behind me. Sarah picked up one of the pistols, a Colt 1911 identical to the one Frank already held. The weight felt good in her hand, familiar and terrible all at once. She qualified expert with the 1911 in training, though SEALs typically carried more modern weapons. This one was old, the bluing worn at the edges, but when she dropped the magazine and checked the chamber, everything moved with the smooth precision of a weapon that had been maintained with religious care. How many rounds total? 56 in the mags plus what's already loaded. Call it 70 rounds. Against how many men? Vincent said he was calling in his boys. Could be 5, could be 15, hard to say. Sarah did the math in her head. If Vincent brought 10 men, that gave them 7 rounds per target, assuming every shot counted and they didn't waste ammunition on suppressive fire or misses. In a real firefight, with adrenaline and movement and chaos, A trained operator averaged maybe 30% accuracy. Untrained civilians, the men Vincent would likely bring, might hit 20% if they were lucky. But it only took one lucky shot to kill you. Emily emerged from behind the counter where she'd been hiding, her face pale but composed in that way people get when shock starts to wear off and reality sets in. You're really going to fight them. It wasn't a question. Sarah looked at the young woman and saw what she must have been like before men like Vincent Kane broke something essential inside her. Pretty, yes, but more than that. There was intelligence in her eyes, strength in the set of her jaw. The kind of person who could have been anything if the world had been kinder. We're going to try. They'll kill you, both of you, and then they'll kill me anyway. Frank's voice was gentle but firm. Emily, I want you to go out the back door right now. Get in your car and drive. Don't stop until you're in the next county. Find a state police barracks and tell them everything. They won't believe me. Sheriff Dalton will say I'm lying. Vincent's lawyers will destroy me. Maybe, but you'll be alive. Emily shook her head and Sarah saw something shift in her expression. Fear giving way to something harder. Anger, maybe? Or just exhaustion with being afraid. No, I'm tired of running, tired of being scared. If you're staying, I'm staying. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to order this girl to safety the way she'd ordered civilians out of the line of fire in a dozen different war zones. But this wasn't a war zone. Emily wasn't a civilian she could command. This was her choice, her stand to make. Frank must have seen the same thing because he nodded slowly. Okay, then we need to prepare. Sarah, help me with the tables. They worked quickly, upending tables and sliding them toward the windows to create makeshift barriers. It wouldn't stop bullets, but it would provide concealment and make it harder for anyone outside to get a clean shot. Sarah directed Emily to turn off all the lights except the ones in the kitchen, creating shadows and dark corners that would make them harder targets. Lock the front door, Sarah said. Force them to break in. Every second they waste is a second we can use. Frank moved to the door and threw the deadbolt, then pulled down the blinds on the windows. The diner suddenly felt smaller, more confined. A fortress or a tomb, depending on how the next hour went. Sarah's mind raced through tactical considerations, fields of fire, choke points, the mathematics of violence that had been drilled into her until they were instinct. The front door was the obvious entry point, a fatal funnel that would let them concentrate fire on anyone trying to force entry. But the kitchen had a back door, and there were windows on both sides of the dining room. Vincent's men could come from 3 directions at once if they were smart. Frank, you take the right side. Cover those windows and the front door. I'll take the left and the kitchen. Emily, you stay low and central. If things go bad, you get behind the counter and you do not move. Understand? Emily nodded, her eyes wide but steady. Outside, they heard the sound of vehicles pulling into the parking lot, doors slamming, voices raised in that particular male bravado that comes before violence, when men convince themselves they're invincible. Sarah risked a glance through a gap in the blinds and counted. 8 men, plus Vincent and his original 4, that made 13 total. 13 against 2, with 70 rounds of ammunition and a scared young woman who'd never fired a gun in her life. Sarah had faced worse odds in Kandahar, barely. Frank took up position behind an overturned table near the front windows. His 1911 held in a 2-handed grip that spoke of decades of muscle memory. Sarah moved to the kitchen, checking the back door. Locked, but the lock was residential grade, easy to force. She grabbed a heavy cast iron skillet from the stove and wedged it under the door handle. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would buy them seconds. Seconds mattered. The voices outside grew louder, closer. Sarah heard Derek Stone's rumble, Vincent Kane's smooth tenor directing traffic. Then another voice, one she didn't recognize, asking what they were supposed to do about the sheriff. Marcus Dalton's reply carried clearly through the walls. I'll handle Morrison and the girl, but I want them alive. Vincent's paying good money for this to look legal. So that was the play. Make it look like Sarah and Frank were the aggressors. Claim self-defense. Marcus would write whatever report Vincent paid him to write, and by morning there'd be 2 dead bodies and a story about crazed veterans attacking upstanding businessmen. Clean, simple, legal. Sarah felt cold rage settle in her gut. This was what happened when corruption went unchecked, when good men did nothing, when the systems designed to protect people became weapons to destroy them. Her father had died fighting this same rot overseas, believing that at least at home, in America, justice meant something. He'd been wrong, or maybe he'd known he was wrong and fought anyway. Fought because the alternative was surrender, and surrender meant the bad guys won. The front door handle rattled, someone testing it, confirming it was locked. Then silence for maybe 30 seconds. Sarah used the time to check her pistol again, making sure the magazine was seated properly, that she had a round in the chamber, that the safety was off. Old habits, the kind that kept you alive. The first shot shattered the front window, showering the interior with glass. Sarah ducked instinctively, even though she was 20 feet away and behind cover. Frank didn't flinch, just adjusted his position to get a better angle on the window. "Warning shot," he said, trying to scare us. "It's working." Frank's laugh was short and bitter. "Fear's good. Fear keeps you sharp. It's when you stop being afraid that you get sloppy." More shots followed, wild and scattered, bullets punching through the walls at random. Suppressive fire meant to keep them pinned while Vincent's men moved into position. Sarah counted the shots, trying to identify weapon types by sound. Handguns mostly, maybe a shotgun. Nothing heavy. That was good. The diner's walls wouldn't stop rifle rounds, but pistol bullets would lose most of their energy going through the old plaster and wood. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it started. In the ringing silence that followed, Vincent's voice called out, "Colonel Morrison, I'm giving you one last chance to be smart about this. Send out the girl and the seal, and we'll let you live. You can keep your diner, keep your life, and we'll forget this whole thing happened." Frank looked at Sarah. She shook her head. Frank turned back toward the window and raised his voice. "How about you forget this whole thing and leave, Vincent, before someone gets hurt? Someone's already going to get hurt, old man. Question is whether it's you or us. I'm betting on you." Vincent's laughter had an edge of hysteria. "You always were stubborn. That's why I liked you, back before you decided to play hero. We could have worked together, Morrison. Could have made a lot of money. But you had to go and develop a conscience. Conscience is what separates us from animals, Kane. No, old man, conscience is what separates winners from losers. And I'm about to show you which one you are." The next attack came fast and coordinated. Two men hit the front door with what sounded like a battering ram, probably a fence post or heavy timber. The door held for the first hit, the second, then splintered on the third. Derek Stone came through the gap in a rush, moving fast for a big man, a pistol in his good hand. Frank fired twice, both shots center mass, the 1911 bucking in his hands. Derek staggered but didn't go down, probably wearing body armor under his shirt. He returned fire wildly, bullets punching into the ceiling and walls. Frank fired again, this time aiming for the head, and Derek dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The next man through tried to use Derek's body as cover, but Frank was already adjusting his aim. Another double tap, and the second man fell. On Sarah's side, someone tried the back door. The cast iron skillet held for maybe 5 seconds before the door burst inward, the skillet clattering across the floor. A man Sarah didn't recognize came through low and fast, a revolver extended. Sarah fired from behind the kitchen counter, 3 quick shots that caught him in the chest and throat. He went down hard, gurgling. Glass shattered on both sides as more men came through the windows. Sarah lost count, lost track, everything narrowing to target acquisition and trigger press. Sight picture. Breathe, squeeze. The 1911 kicked hard in her hands, empty brass tinkling on the tile floor. A man screamed. Another fired back, bullets punching through the counter inches from Sarah's head. She rolled, came up in a new position, fired again. Cordite smoke filled the diner, acrid and choking. Emily was screaming, a high keening sound that cut through the gunfire. Sarah wanted to check on her but couldn't spare the attention. Couldn't take her eyes off the angles and shadows where death waited. Frank was down behind his overturned table, one hand pressed to his side, dark blood seeping between his fingers. But his gun was still up, still tracking, and when another man tried to rush his position, Frank put 2 rounds into his skull with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done this before and knew exactly where to aim. Sarah's pistol locked back empty. She dropped the magazine, slammed in a fresh one, released the slide. The whole motion took maybe 2 seconds, but 2 seconds in a gunfight was an eternity. A bullet cracked past her ear close enough to feel the displacement of air. She returned fire, saw the muzzle flash from the broken front window, adjusted her aim, and squeezed the trigger 3 more times. The shooting stopped again. Sarah's ears rang so badly she could barely hear her own breathing. She counted bodies. 4 down in the diner, 3 she was sure of, and 1 she thought might be playing dead. Outside, someone was groaning in pain. Frank! Still here. His voice was strained, thready. Caught one in the ribs. Not my first time. Sarah risked a glance at him. The old colonel looked pale, his breathing shallow, but his eyes were clear and his hands were steady on his weapon. Tough old bastard. Her father would have liked him. Emily? I'm okay. Emily's voice came from behind the counter, surprisingly calm. I'm okay. Movement at the door. Sarah swung her pistol toward the threat and almost fired before she recognized Sheriff Marcus Dalton stepping through, his service weapon holstered, hands raised. Don't shoot. I'm not here to fight. Sarah kept her gun on him. Then why are you here? To stop this before it gets worse. To talk some sense into you people. Frank's laugh was wet, bubbling. Sense? You're taking bribes from a man who traffics human beings, and you want to talk to us about sense? Marcus flinched like he'd been slapped. I never knew about the trafficking. I swear to God, Morrison, I thought it was just real estate, just money laundering. I didn't know about the girls. You didn't want to know? Maybe. Probably, but I know now, and I'm telling you, you can't win this. Vincent's got 15 men out there, maybe more coming. You've killed 4 of them. You know what that means? That means this doesn't end until you're dead, both of you. Sarah's finger stayed on the trigger. Then I guess it doesn't end. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, and Sarah saw something break behind his eyes, recognition maybe, or just exhaustion. You're Tom Mitchell's daughter. You knew my father? Met him once when he came through here visiting Morrison. Good man, he wouldn't want you to die for this. My father died saving people who couldn't save themselves. That's exactly what he'd want. He died for his country, for a mission. This isn't a mission. This is just pride and stubbornness getting you killed. Frank's voice cut across the space between them. Marcus, you need to make a choice, right now. You can keep being Vincent's lapdog, or you can remember you took an oath. You swore to protect and serve, not to protect and serve whoever paid you the most. Marcus's hand drifted toward his weapon, then stopped. He looked around the diner, at the bodies, at the blood, at the wreckage of violence. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. I've got a daughter. She's sick, cancer. The treatments cost more than my salary can cover. Vincent, he offered to pay, all of it, every hospital bill, every doctor visit. All I had to do was look the other way. And how many daughters like Emily got hurt while you were looking the other way? Marcus closed his eyes. Too many. So make it right. Help us. Testify against Vincent. Give the FBI what they need to take him down. If I do that, my daughter dies. Frank's pistol lowered just slightly. Maybe, or maybe there's other ways to get help. Veterans benefits, charity care, fundraisers. Legal ways that don't involve selling your soul. Those things take time. She doesn't have time. The desperation in Marcus's voice was raw, real. Sarah understood it, had seen it before in the eyes of fathers in Afghanistan and Iraq. Men who'd made terrible choices because they loved their children more than they loved right and wrong. It didn't excuse what Marcus had done, but it explained it. An explanation mattered, even when forgiveness was impossible. Outside, Vincent's voice rang out again. Marcus, you getting them to surrender, or do I need to send more men in there? Marcus looked at Frank, then at Sarah. Something passed between the 3 of them in that moment. A decision made without words. Marcus turned toward the door and raised his voice. They're not surrendering, Vincent. Then get out of the way and let us finish this. No! The single word echoed in the silence that followed. Sarah saw Marcus's hand move to his weapon, saw him draw and turn in one smooth motion. He fired 3 times through the door, and someone outside screamed. Vincent's bellow of rage shook the building. You're dead, Dalton. You're a dead man. Marcus backed deeper into the diner, taking cover behind one of the overturned tables. His face had gone pale but determined. He'd made his choice, crossed his Rubicon. There was no going back now. I hope you 2 have a plan, Marcus said, because I just cut off my only way out. Sarah checked her ammunition. 3 rounds left in her current magazine, 2 full mags remaining, 23 rounds total. Frank looked worse than before, blood soaking through his shirt, his breathing ragged. Marcus had a full 17-round magazine in his Glock plus 2 spares on his belt. 60 rounds against 9 men, maybe more, with Vincent Kane leading them. Still terrible odds, but better than they had been 5 minutes ago. Frank keyed his cell phone with bloody fingers, his face tight with concentration. He held it up so Sarah and Marcus could see the screen. A video recording, the feed showing Vincent and his men outside the diner, clearly visible in the parking lot lights. "I've been streaming to the FBI since this started," Frank said. "Agent Carter's team is 40 minutes out. If we can hold for 40 minutes, we win." 40 minutes? Marcus looked at the bodies on the floor, at the shattered windows, at the blood. "We'll be dead in 10. Then we make it expensive. We make Vincent think twice about every inch he tries to take. We turn this diner into a fortress, and we hold until the cavalry arrives." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Hope, maybe. The kind she'd learned not to trust in combat, but couldn't quite kill. 40 minutes. Her longest firefight in Afghanistan had lasted 37 minutes, pinned down in a compound while Taliban fighters tried to overrun their position. She'd survived that. She could survive this. If her luck held. If Frank didn't bleed out. If Vincent didn't wise up and burn the building down around them. Too many ifs. But they were all the ifs she had. Emily crawled out from behind the counter, her face streaked with tears, but her jaw set. "Tell me what to do. I want to help." Sarah looked at this girl who'd been terrorized and broken and was choosing to stand anyway, choosing to fight. And she remembered something her father had told her once, when she was young and afraid. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite the fear. "Can you reload magazines?" "I can learn." Sarah showed her how to thumb rounds into the magazines, how to seat them properly, how to check that the spring tension was right. Emily's hands shook at first, then steadied as muscle memory took over. Simple mechanical tasks, the kind that kept you sane when the world was ending. Outside, Vincent was organizing his remaining men. Sarah could hear him barking orders, spreading them out around the building, preparing for a coordinated assault from multiple angles. Smart, professional. Vincent might be corrupt, but he wasn't stupid. "They're going to rush us," Sarah said, "all at once. From every side, overwhelming force. We won't be able to cover every angle. So we pick our angle," as Frank said. "We concentrate fire on the main assault and accept that we're going to take flanking fire. Can't stop everything. Can only stop the most dangerous thing." Marcus nodded. "Front door, that's where Derek went down. That's where they're maddest. They'll come through there the hardest." Agreed. They repositioned, all three of them facing the front, their backs exposed to the kitchen and side windows. It was tactically insane, exactly the kind of setup that got people killed in room-clearing drills. But they were out of good options. This was the best of bad choices. The world narrowed to the ragged hole where the front door used to be. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger guard, ready but not committed, breathing slow and steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. Beside her, Frank was leaking blood, but holding his weapon with the same steady grip. Marcus prayed quietly, words Sarah couldn't quite make out but recognized as the Lord's Prayer. Emily finished loading the last magazine and set it beside Sarah's left hand. "I need you to know something," Emily said, "before this starts again. I need you to know that what you're doing, standing up for me, it's the first time in 2 years anyone's treated me like I matter, like I'm worth protecting." Sarah didn't take her eyes off the door. "You do matter, and you are worth protecting, even if we die. Especially if we die, that's what makes it mean something." The assault came exactly as Sarah predicted. Vincent's remaining men hit all three sides simultaneously, a coordinated rush meant to overwhelm through sheer numbers and violence of action. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Men shouted battle cries that were half rage and half fear. Sarah fired into the mass of bodies coming through the front door, not aiming for specific targets, but for center mass of the group. The 1911 barked in her hands, recoil driving up and right, her muscle memory compensating automatically. Brass ejected in bright arcs. Men fell, others kept coming. Frank's weapon jammed. He cleared it with movements made slow by blood loss. But those 3 seconds cost them. A bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell behind the overturned table, his pistol skittering across the floor. Marcus stepped into the gap, his Glock spitting fire in controlled bursts. 3-round patterns, the way he'd been trained at the academy. Effective, deadly. Men went down screaming. Sarah's pistol locked back empty. She dropped it, scooped up Frank's 1911, kept firing. Her world had shrunk to a tunnel, nothing existing except the front door and the men trying to come through it. Training took over. Breathe, sight picture, squeeze. Let the recoil reset again, again, again. Someone made it through. A man Sarah vaguely recognized from the parking lot. He raised a shotgun and Sarah knew with absolute certainty she wouldn't get her weapon around in time. This was it, the end, the place where her luck ran out and physics and geometry conspired to. Emily hit him with a cast iron skillet. The impact was devastating, the heavy pan connecting with the side of the man's skull with a sound like a sledgehammer hitting a pumpkin. He dropped instantly, the shotgun clattering away unfired. Emily stood over him, the skillet raised for another blow, her face transformed by rage and terror and something primal. "Get away from them!" Emily's scream was raw. "Get away!" The assault broke. The men still standing retreated, dragging wounded with them, leaving 3 more bodies on the diner floor. Sarah's ears rang so badly the world seemed to exist underwater. She could see Marcus's mouth moving, but couldn't hear the words. Could see Frank trying to sit up. Blood everywhere, too much blood. The clock on the wall said 34 minutes had passed since Frank had started streaming. 6 minutes to go. 6 minutes might as well have been 6 hours. Sarah crawled to Frank, pressing her hands against the worst of his wounds. The shoulder hit had gone through and through, but the rib shot was bad. She could feel air bubbling under his skin, the telltale sign of a pneumothorax. His lung was collapsed, maybe punctured. He needed a hospital, needed trauma surgeons and blood transfusions and all the things that kept people alive when their bodies tried to quit. He needed things Sarah couldn't give him. "Frank, stay with me. Look at me." His eyes found hers, unfocused but present. "Did we win?" "Not yet. 6 more minutes." 6 minutes. That's not so long. That's not long at all. But Frank's breathing was getting shallower, his skin going gray. Sarah had seen this before in combat, knew the signs. This man, this warrior who'd saved her father's life and given her a chance to redeem 16 years of anger and regret, was dying. "Frank, I need to tell you something about my father. Tom was a good man. I never told him I loved him. Never said it. Not once. I was so angry he kept leaving, kept choosing the army over me. And then he was gone, and I never got to say the words." Frank's hand found hers, his grip weak but deliberate. He knew. Soldiers always know. "How can you be sure?" "Because I have a daughter, too. Had a daughter. She died when she was 10, car accident, and I was deployed when it happened. Wasn't there, but I know she knew I loved her. Because love isn't about words. It's about what you're willing to sacrifice." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She thought about her father, about the man who'd left again and again, not because he didn't love her, but because he loved something bigger, something he was willing to die for. The idea that freedom mattered, that protecting the innocent was worth any cost. She understood now. Finally, too late to tell him, but not too late to honor it. "Frank, you're not going to die. Agent Carter's coming. The FBI's coming. You're going to make it." Frank smiled, blood on his teeth. "Don't lie to a dying man, Sarah. I've been shot enough times to know when it's the last one." "Then don't you die on me. Don't you dare. My father died saving you. You owe him a life well lived." "I tried. God knows I tried, but maybe this is how it was supposed to end. One more fight, one more stand, going out protecting someone who needed protecting. That's not enough. It's everything." Outside, Vincent's voice cracked like a whip. "Morrison, I'm done playing games. You've got 60 seconds to come out, or I'm burning this place to the ground. You, the SEAL, and that little bitch Emily, all of you, 60 seconds. Marcus looked at Sarah, his face asking the question his mouth didn't voice. Sarah looked at Frank, at Emily, at the bodies on the floor and the blood on the walls. She thought about her father, about choices and honor, and the thin line between civilization and chaos. She thought about what it meant to be a warrior, and she knew exactly what her answer would be. The same answer her father would have given. The same answer Frank Morrison had been giving his whole life. No surrender. Not now. Not ever. Sarah counted the seconds in her head while the world burned around her. 60, 59, 58. Vincent Kane's ultimatum hung in the smoke-filled air like a death sentence waiting to be carried out. Through the shattered windows, Sarah could see men moving in the darkness, shadows against shadows, carrying things she knew would be gasoline cans and diesel fuel and whatever else they'd scavenged to turn Mercy's diner into a crematorium. Frank Morrison lay on the floor beside her, his breathing shallow and wet, each exhale bubbling with blood from the punctured lung that was slowly drowning him from the inside. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at something only he could see. Maybe the past, maybe the men he'd led and lost, Maybe his daughter, dead at 10 years old while he'd been half a world away fighting someone else's war. Marcus Dalton crouched behind the overturned table, his service weapon held in hands that trembled just slightly. The sheriff who'd taken bribes and looked the other way while Vincent Kane destroyed lives, now trapped by his own moment of conscience. No way back. No way out except through. And Emily Parker, this girl who'd been broken and terrorized for 2 years, stood with a cast-iron skillet still gripped in white-knuckled hands, blood and hair matted on its surface from the man she'd struck down. Her eyes were wide but dry, past tears, past fear. Hovering in that strange place people reach when they have already accepted they're going to die, and the only question left is what it will mean. 47, 46, 45. Sarah's tactical mind ran scenarios the way it had been trained to do. Offensive options, defensive positions, probability matrices that measured survival in fractions of percentages. Every calculation came back the same. They were going to die here. The math was simple and brutal. 9 men outside with weapons and fuel, and Vincent Kane's money buying their loyalty. 4 people inside with dwindling ammunition and a dying warrior who'd already given more than any person should have to give. But Sarah Mitchell had learned something in 8 years as a Navy SEAL, 4 deployments in places where death wore 1,000 different faces. She'd learned that mathematics only mattered until the moment someone decided it didn't. That impossible odds just meant you needed to change the equation. Her father had changed the equation in Afghanistan, throwing himself on an IED to save 4 men, including Frank Morrison. 1 life traded for 4. The math worked in the Army's favor, the kind of algebra that got your name on a memorial wall and your family a folded flag. Sarah wondered what equation she was solving here, what variables she could manipulate to turn certain death into possible survival. 38, 37, 36. Marcus? Sarah's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. How much ammunition do you have left? The sheriff checked his magazines with practiced efficiency. 17 rounds in the weapon, 34 in reserve, 51 total. Frank? Frank's response was barely a whisper. 4 rounds, maybe 5, lost count. Sarah had 11 rounds remaining in her current magazine, plus 1 full mag. 24 rounds. Add it all together, and they had maybe 80 bullets against 9 men who'd already proven they were willing to die for Vincent's money. Not enough, not even close. But then Sarah's eyes fell on the bodies scattered across the diner floor. Derek Stone, the ex-Marine who'd murdered civilians in Fallujah. 3 other men whose names she didn't know, but whose choices had led them here. Dead men with weapons still holstered or fallen nearby. Dead men who didn't need ammunition anymore. Emily, I need you to search the bodies. Every weapon you find, every magazine, bring them here. Move fast, but stay low. Emily nodded and began crawling between the corpses. Her movements jerky with adrenaline but determined. She pulled a Glock from Derek's shoulder holster, found a revolver on another body, a small .38 special that probably wouldn't penetrate body armor, but would definitely ruin someone's day at close range. 29, 28, 27. Outside, Vincent's voice carried through the broken windows. Time's running out, Morrison. You really want to burn alive? You really want that girl to die screaming? Because that's what's going to happen. That's your legacy. That's how people will remember you. Frank tried to sit up, failed, his face gray as old concrete. Don't listen to him. Vincent talks because he's afraid. Afraid that even if he kills us, we've already won. How have we won? We're trapped. We're outnumbered. We're dying. We're still standing. That's how we win. Every second we don't surrender, we win. Sarah wanted to believe him, wanted to find comfort in the warrior's code that said resistance itself was victory. But she'd seen too many last stands, had read the after-action reports from Alamo and Little Bighorn, and 100 other places where brave men stood their ground and died, and the world kept spinning without them. Courage didn't stop bullets, honor didn't heal wounds, and noble sacrifices just meant you died with a clear conscience, while evil men kept breathing. 20, 19, 18. Emily returned with an armful of weapons. 2 more Glocks, the revolver, a small Beretta 9mm that looked like it had been someone's backup piece, plus 6 additional magazines of various calibers. Sarah sorted through them quickly, checking ammunition counts, clearing chambers, making sure nothing was damaged or empty. Total haul, 63 additional rounds, 143 bullets against 9 men, better odds. Still not good enough. Marcus was watching the windows, his professional training warring with the amateur's fear. When he spoke, his voice was steady despite everything. They're spreading accelerant around the perimeter. I can smell it. Gasoline mixed with diesel. That's a hot burn. Fast. We'll have maybe 90 seconds after they light it before the smoke gets too thick to breathe. Then we don't let them light it. How do you propose we stop them? Sarah's mind raced through options. Suppress them with gunfire. Force them back. Create enough danger that setting the fire became more costly than they were willing to pay. It wasn't a great plan, wasn't even a good plan, but it was the only plan she had. 14, 13, 12. When I give the signal, everyone fires at the same time, maximum volume. Make them think we have more ammunition than we do. Make them think twice about getting close enough to strike a match. Frank's laugh was wet and painful. Deception, the oldest tactic in warfare. It worked for Gideon. Gideon had God on his side. So do we. Sarah wasn't sure she believed that. Wasn't sure she believed in anything except the cold certainty that some things were worth dying for, and Emily Parker was one of them. That if the universe had any justice at all, corrupt men like Vincent Kane didn't get to win just because they had money and numbers and a willingness to burn people alive. 10, 9, 8. She positioned everyone at different windows, creating overlapping fields of fire. Marcus on the right, Emily on the left with the small .38, terrified but steady. Frank propped against the counter, his pistol held in shaking hands that wouldn't stay on target, but might hit something through pure volume of fire. And Sarah herself at the front, where Derek Stone had come through in the first assault, where the door hung in splinters and the floor was slick with blood. 7, 6, 5. On my mark, Sarah said. Fire everything. Full auto if you've got it. Make it loud. Make it scary. Make them regret every choice that brought them here. 4, 3, 2. Sarah saw the flicker of a lighter through the window. Saw the orange bloom of fire catching on gasoline-soaked wood. Saw Vincent Kane's silhouette against the flames, his arm raised like some twisted prophet calling down judgment. 1. Now! The diner erupted in gunfire. 4 weapons firing at once, the muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness, brass raining down like metallic hail. Sarah emptied her magazine into the shadows where she'd seen Vincent, not aiming for specific targets, but for suppression, for the psychological impact of bullets cracking past at supersonic speed. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Someone outside screamed, the sound high and terrified. The fire died, not completely. Small flames still licked at the exterior walls where the accelerant had caught. But the main blaze, the coordinated ignition that would have turned the diner into an inferno, had been disrupted. Men who'd been ready to throw Molotov cocktails had instead thrown themselves to the ground, scrambling for cover from the unexpected fusillade. Sarah reloaded, her hands moving with mechanical efficiency. Beside her, Emily was crying and firing at the same time, the .38 bucking in her small hands, probably not hitting anything but making Vincent's men think twice about standing up. The phone in Frank's pocket buzzed. He fumbled for it with blood-slick fingers, nearly dropped it, managed to thumb the screen active. Agent Carter's face appeared, the FBI man's expression tight with professional concern. Colonel Morrison, we're 3 minutes out. I need you to hold for 3 more minutes. Can you do that? Frank's voice was barely audible. We're trying. They tried to burn us. We stopped them. But they'll try again. I know. I can see it on the stream. You're doing good, Frank. You and that SEAL, Tom Mitchell, would be proud of his daughter. Sarah felt something twist in her chest hearing her father's name. Felt the weight of legacy and expectation and the terrible burden of living up to a dead man's heroism. Agent Carter, if we don't make it, you need to know something. Vincent Kane is running a human trafficking operation. Emily Parker can testify. Marcus Dalton can corroborate. Make sure they don't die for nothing. Nobody's dying, Mitchell. You hold for 3 minutes. 3 minutes and this is over. The call ended. 3 minutes. 180 seconds. Sarah had held positions for longer under worse fire, had gone 20 minutes pinned down in a compound in Kandahar with ammunition running low and air support delayed by weather. 3 minutes should be nothing. Should be. But her body was running on fumes. Adrenaline crash warring with combat high. Frank was dying. Emily was past her breaking point and running purely on shock. Marcus was solid, but he was one man with limited ammunition and a lifetime of poor choices weighing on his conscience. 3 minutes might as well have been 3 hours. Vincent's voice rang out again, and this time there was something different in it. Not confidence, not control, but the rising edge of desperation that made dangerous men do catastrophically stupid things. You think you've won? You think 3 minutes makes a difference? I'll tell you what happens in 3 minutes. In 3 minutes, the FBI shows up and finds 5 bodies. You, Morrison, you, Mitchell, Emily, Marcus, and one more. A new figure emerged from the shadows, shoved forward by one of Vincent's men. Sarah's heart stopped. It was a boy, maybe 16 years old, tall and gangly with the awkward proportions of someone growing too fast. He wore a high school letterman jacket and had terror written across every inch of his face. Marcus made a sound like he'd been gut shot. "That's my son. That's Tyler." "Vincent, you son of a bitch, you leave him alone." Vincent's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Your son, Marcus? The boy you've been working so hard to protect?" Funny thing about family, they make us do terrible things, make us compromise, make us choose between being good and keeping them safe. He pressed a pistol against the boy's temple, and Sarah saw Tyler's legs buckle, saw the wet stain spreading across the front of his jeans as his bladder let go, saw Marcus Dalton's face transform from determined to destroyed in the space between heartbeats. "So here's the new deal," Vincent continued. "You come out right now, all of you, hands up, weapons down, or Tyler here gets to see what his brains look like on the outside." Marcus was already standing, already moving toward the door. "No, no, please, take me. Kill me. Just let my boy go." "Marcus, stop!" Sarah grabbed his arm. "It's a trap. The second you go out there, he'll kill you both." "I don't care. That's my son. I won't let him die because of my mistakes. If you go out there, everyone dies. Tyler, you, us, everyone. Because Vincent doesn't leave witnesses." But Marcus wasn't listening, wasn't capable of listening. Sarah had seen this before, the way love could override survival instinct, could make rational people do irrational things. Marcus would walk into certain death for the slim chance of saving his son, would trade his life without hesitation. And Vincent knew it, was counting on it. Frank's voice, weak but clear. "Marcus, look at me." The sheriff turned, and Sarah saw the tears streaming down his face. "Your boy needs you alive, needs you to be the father he deserves, the man you should have been all along. If you go out there, if you die, who teaches him how to be better than you were? If I don't go, he dies right now. Maybe, or maybe we call Vincent's bluff. Maybe we bet that he needs Tyler alive more than he needs to prove a point." It was a terrible bet, the kind that got people killed. But Frank was right about one thing. Marcus surrendering wouldn't save Tyler, wouldn't save anyone. It would just give Vincent 4 more bodies to burn and one traumatized teenager to either kill or corrupt. Sarah made a decision. "Vincent!" She raised her voice to carry through the broken windows. "You want me? I'm the one who killed Derek. I'm the one who started this. Let the boy go and I'll come out." Emily grabbed her arm. "No, you can't." "I can and I will." Frank tried to sit up, failed. "Sarah, don't. Your father didn't save me so you could throw your life away. My father saved you because he thought you were worth saving. Now I'm saving that boy because he's worth it too." The calculus of sacrifice. One life for one life. The same math her father had done in Afghanistan. Sarah wondered if this was genetic, this willingness to die for strangers. If Tom Mitchell had passed down more than his leather jacket in his eyes. Vincent considered the offer, his gun still pressed against Tyler's skull. "You come out unarmed, hands on your head. You try anything and the kid dies." "Agreed." Sarah set down her weapons, stood slowly, her hands rising above her head. Marcus grabbed her wrist. "Don't do this. Please, he's my son. It should be me." "It should be nobody, but if someone has to go, better me than you. You've got a chance to be the father Tyler needs. Don't waste it." She walked toward the door, each step feeling like miles. Behind her, Emily was sobbing. Frank was praying, words she couldn't quite make out. Marcus stood frozen, torn between competing imperatives that would haunt him the rest of his life, regardless of what he chose. Sarah stepped through the ruined doorway into the firelit night. The air smelled of gasoline and blood and burning wood. Vincent's remaining men formed a loose semicircle, weapons raised, eyes wide with the particular fear that comes after you've seen friends die and realize you might be next. Vincent shoved Tyler to the ground and turned his full attention to Sarah. "The famous Navy SEAL, Tom Mitchell's daughter. You know, I met your father once, years ago when he came through here with Morrison. He seemed like a good man. Shame he raised such a stupid daughter." Sarah kept her hands high, her voice level. Let the boy go, that was the deal. The deal was you come out, you're out. But I don't remember saying anything about letting Tyler leave. Of course. Sarah had known it was a lie, known Vincent would never honor any agreement. But sometimes you walked into the trap anyway because the alternative was watching a child die. So what now? You shoot me, and then what? The FBI's 2 minutes away. You kill me, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Vincent's smile was cold. You think I'm going to prison? Sweet girl, you don't understand how the world works. I've got lawyers. I've got politicians. I've got enough money to make this whole thing disappear. By tomorrow, the story will be that a crazed veteran went on a rampage, that Sheriff Dalton and I heroically tried to stop her, that sadly, Colonel Morrison and Emily Parker were killed in the crossfire. Nobody will believe that. Everybody will believe it, because believing it is easier than believing their sheriff was corrupt, easier than believing a decorated war hero could be a monster. People believe what makes them comfortable. He was right. Sarah had seen it before. The way society bent reality to fit comfortable narratives. The way heroes got worshipped and complicated truths got buried. Vincent had the money and connections to rewrite history, to turn victims into villains and predators into protectors. Unless someone stopped him. Sarah's weight shifted almost imperceptibly, settling into her hips, her muscles coiling. She'd been trained by the best warriors in the world, had spent 8 years learning 1,000 ways to kill with her bare hands. But she was 20 feet from Vincent, with 5 armed men between them and a gun pressed against a teenager's head. Impossible odds. But Sarah Mitchell specialized in impossible. Last chance, Vincent. Let the boy go. Or what? You'll kill me with your mind? Something like that. The night exploded, not from Sarah's action, but from behind her, where Marcus Dalton had apparently made his own impossible choice. The sheriff came through the door firing, his Glock spitting flame and thunder, rounds punching into Vincent's men with devastating accuracy. 2 went down immediately, center mass hits that crumpled them like puppets. A third took a round in the shoulder and spun away. Vincent stumbled backward, his gun swinging away from Tyler toward this new threat. Sarah moved. 8 years of training compressed into 3 seconds of violence. She covered the distance to the nearest gunman in 4 strides, inside his reaction time, her hand chopping down on his wrist to knock the weapon loose. Her other hand drove into his throat, crushing his larynx, dropping him gasping to the ground. The second man got his gun halfway up before Sarah's knee destroyed his elbow joint. She stripped the weapon from his nerveless fingers and put 2 rounds into his chest before he hit the ground. Tyler scrambled away on hands and knees, making for the diner, for safety, for his father who'd finally found his spine. Vincent fired wild, bullets cracking past Sarah's head. She dove, rolled, came up firing the stolen pistol. Saw Vincent stagger, blood blooming on his thigh. Saw him raise his weapon again. Then Frank Morrison appeared in the doorway, somehow on his feet despite the blood loss and the collapsed lung and 68 years of accumulated damage. The old colonel's pistol barked once, twice, 3 times. Vincent Kane, corrupt businessman and human trafficker, destroyer of lives and purchaser of souls, fell backward into the fire he'd meant for others. His screaming lasted maybe 10 seconds before Marcus put a mercy round into him. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah stood in the parking lot, surrounded by bodies and blood and the dying flames of the fire Vincent had started. Her hands shook with adrenaline crash. Her ears rang from sustained gunfire in enclosed spaces. Her mouth tasted of copper and smoke. Behind her, Tyler Dalton was sobbing in his father's arms. Marcus held his son like he was made of glass, both of them shaking, both of them alive against all probability. Emily emerged from the diner still carrying that cast-iron skillet, her eyes wide and distant with shock. She looked at the carnage, at Vincent's burning corpse, at Sarah standing among the dead like some avenging angel. Is it over? Sarah wanted to say yes, wanted to tell this girl that the monsters were dead and justice had been served and she could go back to her normal life. But Sarah had learned that violence never really ended. It just changed shape. The men were dead, but the trauma lived on. The threat was neutralized, but the scars remained. For now, sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. Red and blue lights painted the horizon, the cavalry arriving 3 minutes late, but arriving nonetheless. Sarah saw the FBI vehicles screaming into the parking lot, armed agents pouring out with weapons drawn and voices raised. Agent Carter was first through, his face going pale as he took in the scene. Bodies everywhere, blood pooling on gravel, flames still licking at the diner's exterior walls. And in the center of it all, Sarah Mitchell covered in other people's blood, holding a gun she'd taken from a dead man. Jesus Christ. Sarah let the weapon drop from her fingers, raised her hand slowly. It's over, Agent Carter. Vincent Kane is dead. His organization is broken. But you need to get an ambulance here now. Colonel Morrison is dying. Carter was already moving, already shouting orders into his radio. Other agents swarmed the scene, securing weapons, checking pulses, calling for medical support. The professional chaos of federal law enforcement turning a war zone into a crime scene. Sarah stumbled toward the diner, her body finally acknowledging the damage it had taken. She'd been shot, she realized. Somewhere in the fighting, a bullet had creased her side, a shallow groove that burned like fire now that the adrenaline was fading. Not serious, not life-threatening, just one more scar to add to the collection. Frank lay where he'd fallen, just inside the doorway, his pistol still clutched in his hand. Sarah knelt beside him, taking his other hand, feeling the flutter of pulse against her fingers. Too fast, too weak. The old warrior was checking out. Frank, stay with me. The ambulance is coming. His eyes found hers, clearer now than they'd been in an hour. Did we win? We won. Good. That's good. His breathing was getting shallower. Sarah, I need to tell you something about your father. You don't have to. Yes, I do. The day Tom died, the day he pushed me out of the way of that IED, you know what his last words were? Sarah shook her head, not trusting her voice. He said, tell Sarah I'm proud of her. Tell her she was always enough. The words broke something inside Sarah that had been held together by anger and regret for 16 years. She felt tears streaming down her face, hot and cleansing, washing away the accumulated guilt of a daughter who'd never said goodbye. He never told me that. He was going to, was planning to call you that night, but he never got the chance. So I'm telling you now, you were always enough, and tonight, watching you fight, I know he was right to be proud. Frank's grip loosened, his breathing stopped. Sarah held his hand while the paramedics arrived and tried to restart his heart, and failed because some wounds go too deep and some lives have given everything they have to give. She held his hand while Agent Carter took her statement, and Emily's statement, and Marcus's statement. Held it while the sun rose over Wyoming and painted the blood-stained parking lot in shades of gold and red. She held it until another agent, gentle but firm, told her she needed to let go now, that the medical examiner needed to do their work, that Colonel Frank Morrison, Army Ranger, warrior and protector, had earned his rest. Sarah finally released his hand and stood. Her father's leather jacket was soaked with blood. Her hands were steady despite everything. And somewhere deep inside, in a place that had been frozen since she was 12 years old, something had thawed. Emily approached her, moving carefully like someone learning to walk after a long illness. What happens now? Sarah looked at this girl who'd been broken and terrorized and had found strength she didn't know she possessed, looked at Marcus Dalton holding his son and trying to figure out how to rebuild a relationship he'd nearly destroyed, looked at the diner, damaged but standing, a fortress that had held against impossible odds. Now we live, we heal, we remember, and we make sure they didn't die for nothing. How do we do that? Sarah thought about her father, about Frank Morrison, about all the warriors who'd stood in dark places so others could sleep safely, about the cost of freedom and the price of justice, and the terrible mathematics of sacrifice. We become the people they believed we could be. Agent Carter approached, his face weary but professional. Miss Mitchell, I'm going to need you to come with me. There's going to be an investigation. Questions. Probably a lot of them. Am I under arrest? No, but there are 17 dead bodies here. The Bureau needs to understand exactly what happened. Sarah nodded. She'd known this was coming, had accepted it the moment she decided to stand with Frank Morrison. Some fights cost you everything, including the comfortable lie that heroism went unpunished. But as they led her toward the waiting vehicles, past the covered bodies and the evidence markers and the remains of the night's violence, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in 16 years. She felt her father's pride, not imagined, not hoped for, but real and solid and true. The kind of pride that comes from knowing you stood when you could have run, that you fought when you could have surrendered, that you held the line because holding the line was all that mattered. The sun climbed higher, burning away the smoke and the shadows. Somewhere in Wyoming, a daughter had finally found the words to say goodbye to a father who died 16 years too soon. Somewhere in this broken diner, an old warrior, had found redemption in his last stand. Somewhere in the ashes of Vincent Kane's empire, justice had been served with violence and blood and terrible cost. Sarah Mitchell climbed into the FBI vehicle and didn't look back. The war was over. But wars never really end. They just teach us who we are when everything else is stripped away. And Sarah had learned she was her father's daughter. That would have to be enough. The interrogation room smelled like stale coffee and institutional disinfectant, the kind of place designed to break down liars and extract truth through sheer psychological grinding. Sarah sat at a metal table bolted to the concrete floor, her hands wrapped around a styrofoam cup that had gone cold an hour ago. Across from her, Agent Carter and a woman in an FBI jacket with the name Reynolds stenciled across the back reviewed documents with the methodical patience of people who'd done this 10,000 times before. 72 hours had passed since the firefight at Mercy's Diner. 3 days since Frank Morrison had died holding her hand. 3 days since she'd killed 5 men and watched a 6th burn alive. The world had continued spinning, indifferent to violence and death and the terrible price of standing your ground. Sarah's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in defending military personnel, sat beside her, taking notes. The lawyer had appeared 16 hours after Sarah's arrest, paid for by some veterans organizations Sarah had never heard of, claiming that Navy SEALs who fought human traffickers deserved the best representation money could buy. Agent Reynolds looked up from her files, her expression neutral in that way law enforcement learns to be when dealing with people who exist in moral gray areas. Let's go through it again, Miss Mitchell. Start from when you entered the diner. Sarah had told the story 6 times already, had walked them through every decision, every shot fired, every moment of the longest night of her life. But she told it again, her voice flat and mechanical, reducing chaos and terror to a timeline of facts. Reynolds listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes, her face revealing nothing. When Sarah finished, the agent sat back and studied her with eyes that had probably interrogated cartel sicarios and terrorist financiers and every flavor of human monster the world produced. You killed 5 men with your bare hands or weapons you took from them. That's in addition to the 3 you shot during the initial assault. 8 men total, Miss Mitchell. That's a lot of bodies. They were trying to kill us. It was self-defense. Self-defense has limits. There's a doctrine called proportional response. You don't get to execute people because they threatened you. Patricia Chen's voice was sharp as a scalpel. Agent Reynolds, my client responded to an active threat with appropriate force. She was outnumbered 13-4, trapped in a building that was being set on fire, protecting a civilian who'd been terrorized for years. Every action she took was justified under Wyoming self-defense law and federal precedent regarding defense of others. Reynolds didn't look away from Sarah. I'm not questioning the legality, counselor. I'm questioning the psychology. Miss Mitchell here has been trained to kill, has killed before. She's been out of the service for 6 months, struggling with the transition to civilian life. Then she walks into a situation and within hours, 8 people are dead. That's a pattern that concerns me. Sarah felt anger flare hot and immediate in her chest. You think I wanted this? You think I woke up that morning hoping to get into a gunfight? I think you're a hammer, and when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Agent Reynolds, Carter's voice carried a warning edge. That's enough. We've reviewed Miss Mitchell's service record. She's not some trigger-happy cowboy. She's a decorated operator who saves civilian lives. Reynolds gestured at the crime scene photo spread across the table. 17 body bags, a diner that looked like Fallujah, blood everywhere. Saved lives, 17 people are dead, Agent Carter. Vincent Kane and his men, yes, but also Derek Stone, who despite his dishonorable discharge was never convicted of any crime. Also Marcus Dalton's deputies who showed up thinking they were backing up their sheriff and walked into a war zone. Also Frank Morrison, a 68-year-old man who should have called the police instead of playing Rambo. Sarah's hands clenched into fists under the table. Derek Stone murdered civilians in Iraq. Vincent Kane ran a human trafficking ring. Those deputies knew exactly what they were backing up. And Frank Morrison was a hero who died protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Frank Morrison was a PTSD-riddled veteran who'd been stockpiling weapons and playing vigilante for 5 years. We found evidence he'd been conducting illegal surveillance, intercepting communications, operating as an unlicensed private investigator. He was obsessed, Miss Mitchell, and you enabled that obsession. The words hit like physical blows. Sarah wanted to scream that Frank had been trying to stop evil, that his obsession was born of love and duty, that calling him crazy dishonored everything he'd sacrificed. But she could see what Reynolds was doing, building a narrative, creating a story where Sarah and Frank were unstable veterans who'd escalated a simple dispute into a massacre. Patricia Chen must have seen it too because she stood abruptly. "This interview is over unless you're charging my client with a crime. We're leaving." Reynolds leaned back, her expression unreadable. "We're not charging her yet. The investigation is ongoing. But Miss Mitchell should understand that public opinion is divided. Half the country thinks she's a hero. The other half thinks she's a murderer. The district attorney is getting pressure from both sides, from veterans groups demanding she get a medal, from civil rights organizations demanding she face trial." "What do you think?" Sarah heard herself ask. Reynolds met her eyes. "I think you did what you thought was right. I think Frank Morrison did what he thought was right. I think Marcus Dalton finally found his spine and did what he thought was right. And I think 17 people are still dead, and death doesn't care about intentions." She closed her files and stood. "You're free to go, Miss Mitchell, but stay in the area. We'll need you for the grand jury hearing in 2 weeks." The Wyoming sky was the kind of blue that only exists in high-altitude states. So deep it looked like you could fall upward into it forever. Sarah stood in the parking lot of the FBI field office, breathing air that didn't taste like blood and gunpowder, trying to remember how to exist in a world where people weren't actively trying to kill her. Patricia Chen lit a cigarette, offered one to Sarah, who declined. "You did good in there, stayed calm, didn't let Reynolds bait you. She thinks I'm a killer. She thinks you're complicated. There's a difference." The lawyer blew smoke into the crystalline air. "The truth is, you're probably not going to face charges. Too many witnesses corroborating your story. Too much evidence of Vincent's criminal enterprise. The DA knows a jury would never convict. But your life is never going to be the same. You're going to be famous, Sarah. The female SEAL who shot it out with human traffickers. People are going to write books about you, make movies. You'll get offered reality TV shows and speaking engagements and endorsement deals." Sarah felt nauseous. "I don't want any of that. Doesn't matter what you want. The story's already out there, already being told. You get to decide whether you control the narrative or let others control it for you." A car pulled into the parking lot, a battered Honda Civic that had seen better decades. Emily Parker sat behind the wheel, her face pale but composed. She waved tentatively. Patricia stubbed out her cigarette. "I'll be in touch about the grand jury. Don't talk to the press. Don't post on social media. Just lay low and let this settle." The lawyer walked to her own car, leaving Sarah standing in the parking lot feeling untethered and strange. Emily got out of the Honda, moving with the careful precision of someone still processing trauma. "They let you go. For now. Marcus posted bail this morning. He's home with Tyler. Says he wants to talk to you." "I don't know if I'm ready for that." Emily looked at the ground, her voice small. "I went back to the diner yesterday. It's still taped off as a crime scene, but I could see inside. There's blood everywhere, on the floor, on the walls, on the ceiling. I keep thinking about how close we came, how easily it could have been our blood. But it wasn't. We survived." "Did we?" "Because I don't feel like I survived. I feel like I died in that diner, and what's walking around now is just some ghost pretending to be Emily Parker." Sarah understood, had felt the same way after her first kill in Syria. The disconnect between the person you were before violence and the person you became after. The way trauma carved channels through your psyche that never quite filled in again. "It gets easier, not better, but easier." "Does it? Or do you just get better at pretending?" Sarah didn't have an answer for that. They drove in silence through Hollow Creek, past the feed store and the gas station, and the small houses with their neat lawns and American flags hanging limp in the still air. A banner stretched across Main Street proclaimed "Home of Heroes," a hastily made thing that someone's grandmother had probably sewed. People on the sidewalk pointed at Emily's car, recognizing it from the news coverage. Sarah slouched lower in her seat. "This is insane. They want to give you a parade. The town council voted on it. Marcus told them to wait until after the investigation, but people are already planning it." "A parade for what? For killing people? For saving me? For stopping Vincent? For standing up when everyone else was too scared?" "Frank did that, not me. I just showed up at the right time." Emily pulled into the diner's parking lot and killed the engine. The building stood dark and damaged, crime scene tape fluttering in the breeze. Someone had left flowers by the front door. Dozens of bouquets, along with candles and handwritten notes and a photograph of Frank Morrison in his Army Ranger uniform, young and proud and alive. Emily stared at the memorial. Do you believe in God, Sarah? I don't know, sometimes, when it's convenient. I've been praying, asking God why he let this happen, why he let Vincent hurt me for 2 years, why he let Frank die, why he put you in that diner at exactly that moment. She turned to look at Sarah. Want to know what answer I got? What? Nothing. Absolute silence. And I realized that's the answer. God doesn't intervene, doesn't send angels to save us. He sends people, broken, scared, imperfect people who choose to stand up. People like you. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes. I'm not an angel, Emily. I'm just someone who made a choice. That's what angels are, people who choose to fight for others when they could walk away. The Honda's passenger door opened, and Marcus Dalton slid into the back seat, his face haggard and worn. He'd aged a decade in 3 days, lines carved deep around his eyes and mouth. Figured I'd find you two here. Sarah turned to face him. How's Tyler? Traumatized, angry, confused. Everything a 16-year-old should be when his father's corruption nearly gets him killed. Marcus's voice was raw, but alive. Thanks to you. Thanks to you. You're the one who came through that door shooting. After I spent 5 years enabling Vincent. After I let him terrorize this town because I was too weak to do what was right. Marcus pulled out his badge and gun, set them on the center console. I resigned this morning, turned in my badge. FBI's recommending charges for corruption and obstruction. I'll probably do 5 to 10 years. What about Tyler? He'll live with his aunt in Billings. Good woman. Better parent than I ever was. Maybe he'll turn out okay despite having me for a father. Emily reached back and took Marcus's hand. You saved us. In the end, when it mattered, you did the right thing. Doesn't undo the wrong I did for 5 years. No, but it's a start. They sat in silence. 3 survivors bound by violence and loss and the strange intimacy that comes from facing death together. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering fallen leaves across the parking lot. Somewhere a dog barked. Life continuing, indifferent to their pain. Marcus cleared his throat. Frank left something for you. Found it in his safe deposit box. Asked me to give it to you if anything happened to him. He handed Sarah a manila envelope, thick and heavy. Sarah opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in Frank's handwriting, shaky but legible, and a smaller envelope addressed to Tom Mitchell that had never been sent. Sarah unfolded Frank's letter and read, Sarah, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably died doing something stupid and stubborn, because that's who I am, who I was. Grammar gets confusing when you're writing from beyond the grave. I want you to know something about your father. Tom Mitchell was the best soldier I ever commanded, not because he was the toughest or the smartest or the best shot, but because he understood what service meant, not just to country, but to each other. The day he died, we were on patrol outside Kandahar. Intel said the road was clear. It wasn't. Tom saw the IED first, saw the pressure plate, saw me about to step on it. He didn't hesitate, didn't freeze, just moved, pushed me clear, and took the blast himself. I've carried that for 16 years. Carried the guilt of being alive when he wasn't. Carried the weight of a debt I could never repay. Until you walked into my diner and gave me a chance to honor his memory by protecting you the way he protected me. Your father's last words weren't profound, weren't poetic. He just said, tell Sarah. That's it. The explosion cut him off, but I knew what he meant. Tell Sarah he loved her. Tell Sarah he was proud. Tell Sarah that every deployment, every mission, every moment away from her was because he was trying to make the world safer for his little girl. The other envelope contains a letter he wrote to you. He carried it with him for 6 months, trying to work up the courage to send it. Never did. After he died, I kept it. Told myself I was waiting for the right time. Truth is, I was afraid that giving it to you would make his death real in a way I wasn't ready to face. I'm giving it to you now because you deserve to hear from him. Deserve to know who he was beyond the uniform and the flag in the terrible algebra of sacrifice. Be good, Sarah Mitchell. Be better than me. Be the person your father believed you could be. And if you get the chance, live the life he died to protect. Frank Morrison. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the second envelope. Her father's handwriting filled the page, familiar from birthday cards and notes left on the refrigerator during his rare trips home. Dear Sarah, I'm writing this from a FOB outside Kandahar at 0200 hours. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about you. about the way you looked at me when I left for this deployment. Angry, hurt, like I was choosing strangers over my own daughter. Maybe you're right. Maybe I am. But I need you to understand something, baby girl. I don't leave because I don't love you. I leave because I do. Every terrorist I help capture is one less terrorist who might hurt you someday. Every village I help secure is one less place where evil can take root and spread. Every mission I complete is one more step toward a world where you can grow up safe and free and never have to know the things I've seen. You're 12 now. By the time you read this, you'll be older, maybe grown, maybe with kids of your own. And you'll understand what I'm about to tell you. Being a parent means making impossible choices. It means sacrificing your own happiness for your child's future. It means dying a little bit every time you walk away so they can live a little bit more fully. I'm proud of you, Sarah. Proud of your strength, your intelligence, your stubborn refusal to accept injustice. You get that from your mother. The good parts of me are buried so deep you'd need a backhoe to find them. But the good parts of her, those shine through you every day. If something happens to me, if I don't make it home, I need you to know something. You were always enough. You were always the best thing I ever did. And if I could go back and choose between my career and being your father, I'd choose you every single time. But I can't go back. Can only go forward. Can only hope that the choices I'm making now, the sacrifices I'm accepting, will somehow make your future brighter. Live well, Sarah. Live fearlessly. Live with the fierce certainty that you deserve every good thing this world has to offer. And when you're scared, when you're facing something that seems impossible, remember that you're Tom Mitchell's daughter. And Tom Mitchell's daughter can do anything. I love you more than words can carry. Your dad. Sarah read the letter 3 times through tears that wouldn't stop falling. Read it until the words blurred and her throat ached from the suppressed sobs. Read it while Emily held her hand and Marcus looked away to give her privacy in her grief. Her father had loved her, had been proud of her, had carried that letter for 6 months because he didn't know how to bridge the gap between them that his duty had created. And he died before finding the words. Just like Sarah had spent 16 years unable to find the words to forgive him. The cosmic tragedy of families who love each other but can't quite speak the language. Emily's voice was gentle. What does it say? Sarah wiped her eyes, folded the letter carefully, tucked it back in the envelope. It says I was wrong about everything, about him, about why he left, about what it meant. And now I have to figure out how to live with that. They sat in the car while the sun tracked across the sky, while shadows lengthened and the temperature dropped and the world continued its relentless turning. Eventually Marcus excused himself, walking toward his own vehicle with the bent posture of a man carrying weight he'd never fully set down. Emily started the engine. Where do you want to go? Sarah looked at the diner, at Frank's memorial, at the place where she'd become someone new. Someone her father would have recognized. Someone he might have been proud of. Cedar Ridge National Cemetery, I have something to say. The drive took 40 minutes through country roads that wound between mountains and meadows. Through landscapes so beautiful it seemed impossible that violence and death could exist in the same universe. Emily drove in silence, understanding that some journeys needed quiet. The cemetery stretched across a hillside overlooking a valley where a river ran silver in the fading light. Rows of white headstones marched in perfect formation, the eternal parade ground where warriors finally rested. American flags snapped in the wind, one beside each grave, marking the dead as belonging to something larger than themselves. Sarah found her father's grave in Section 12, Row 7, marker number 43. A simple white cross with his name, rank, and dates of service. Born 1975, died 2009. The mathematics of a life reduced to numbers on stone. She knelt beside the grave, her fingers tracing the engraved letters. Thomas James Mitchell, Sergeant, U.S. Army Rangers, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Afghanistan. No mention of father, no mention of husband, just soldier, as if that was all he'd been. Sarah pulled the letters from her jacket, her father's words and Frank's words, and she read them aloud to the man who couldn't hear her. Read them while the sun set and the shadows grew long, and Emily waited in the car, giving her the space to say goodbye. When she finished, Sarah pressed her palm against the cold stone. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner, Dad. Sorry I was so angry. Sorry I wasted 16 years hating you for doing exactly what you taught me to do. Standing up, protecting others, holding the line. The wind carried her words away, indifferent. I met Frank Morrison, the man you saved. He was everything you said a soldier should be. Honor, duty, sacrifice. He died the same way you did, protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves. I think you would have liked how it ended. A raven called from a nearby pine tree, harsh and lonely. I killed 8 men last week. I know that's not something a daughter should tell her father, but I think you'd understand. They were bad people doing bad things, and I was the only one in position to stop them. So I did, the way you taught me. Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, some knot that had been tied the day her father died and never quite released. I forgive you, Dad, for leaving, for choosing the army, for dying before we could fix things between us. I forgive you for all of it. And I hope wherever you are, you can forgive me for being too young and too angry to understand. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees, and placed her father's letter on the grave, weighted down with a stone so the wind wouldn't carry it away. Let him keep his own words. Let them rest here with him. I'm going to try, Dad, to live the life you died protecting, to be the person you believed I could be. I don't know if I'll succeed, don't know if I can be half the person you were, but I'm going to try. The sun touched the horizon, painting the valley in shades of amber and gold. Sarah saluted her father's grave, the crisp military gesture she'd learned at Annapolis, the final acknowledgement of a warrior to another warrior. Then she walked back to the car where Emily waited, and together they drove into the gathering darkness, two survivors bound by violence and loss, and the fragile hope that maybe, somehow, life would eventually hurt less. Behind them, the cemetery settled into night, the white stones glowing pale in the moonlight, markers for all the men and women who'd given the last full measure. Among them, Thomas James Mitchell rested in the company of heroes. His daughter had finally come home, and in the coming, had found a way to forgive them both. 6 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood in front of a different grave on a cold March morning when spring was still just a promise written in distant clouds. This headstone was newer than her father's, the granite still sharp-edged and unweathered by time. Colonel Frank Morrison, U.S. Army Rangers, 1957 to 2025. Above his name, someone had carved a simple phrase. He held the line. Sarah laid a bouquet of white roses beside the marker, the same flowers she'd brought every week since his funeral. The cemetery groundskeeper had stopped asking her relationship to the deceased, just nodded respectfully when she arrived and gave her the space to mourn. The grand jury had declined to indict her 3 months ago. Insufficient evidence of criminal wrongdoing, they'd said. Clear case of self-defense in defense of others. The district attorney had held a press conference praising her courage while carefully avoiding any language that might suggest law enforcement had failed to protect Emily Parker for 2 years. Political theater, the kind that made Sarah's stomach turn. But she was free. No charges, no trial, just the weight of 17 dead men and the knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross, that she'd become something her 12-year-old self wouldn't recognize and her father would have understood too well. Morning, Frank. Sarah spoke to the stone like it could hear her. Maybe it could. She didn't believe in much anymore, but she believed that men like Frank Morrison left echoes in the world, ripples that kept spreading long after the stone hit the water. Big day today. Thought you should know about it. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant snow. Somewhere a hawk cried, hunting the meadows beyond the cemetery fence. Emily's doing better, started college last month, University of Montana, psychology major, says she wants to help people who've been through what she went through. I think you'd be proud of her. Sarah pulled her father's leather jacket tighter. She wore it everywhere now, even though spring was coming and the weather was warming. Wore it like armor, like a reminder of who she was supposed to be. Marcus is in federal prison in Colorado, medium security. Tyler visits him once a month. They're rebuilding something. Might not ever be what it was, but it's something more than they had before. A robin landed on Frank's headstone, cocked its head at Sarah, then flew away in a flash of red breast and brown wings. The FBI shut down Vincent's whole network, arrested 47 people, rescued 32 women and girls. Agent Carter says it was the biggest human trafficking bust in Wyoming history. So I guess we did some good, even if it cost everything. Sarah knelt beside the grave, her fingers tracing Frank's name the way she'd traced her father's 6 months ago. I'm leaving today, driving west, probably Oregon or Washington, somewhere I can disappear, somewhere people don't recognize me from the news coverage. She paused. I know you'd tell me to stay, to fight, to not let them chase me away. But I'm tired, Frank. So tired of being looked at like I'm either a hero or a monster. Tired of people wanting pieces of me, wanting my story, my endorsement, my opinion on things I don't understand. The words came easier now than they had 6 months ago. The therapy helped. Weekly sessions with a psychiatrist who specialized in combat veterans, working through the PTSD and the survivor's guilt and the peculiar horror of killing people whose faces you could see. Who'd helped her understand that walking away wasn't weakness. Sometimes it was the strongest thing you could do. Mercy's Diner is gone. Town council voted to demolish it last month. Too much blood, too many memories. They're putting in a park, Memorial Garden. Your name's going on a plaque. You and my dad together, brothers in arms, even if you served different generations. Sarah stood, brushing grass from her knees. I wish I'd known you longer. Wish we'd had more time. But I'm grateful for the time we had. Grateful you showed me what my father was trying to teach me. That some things are worth standing for, worth dying for, even when the math doesn't add up and the odds are impossible. She saluted the grave, crisp and sharp, the gesture her father had taught her when she was 6 years old playing soldier in the backyard. Rest easy, Colonel. Your mission's complete. You held the line. You held it until the very end. The truck was packed and ready when Sarah returned to the motel room she'd been renting by the week. Everything she owned fit in 4 duffel bags and 2 cardboard boxes. 8 years of military service and 28 years of life, reduced to what could fit in a Ford F-150's bed. She was loading the last box when Emily pulled up in her Honda, Tyler Dalton in the passenger seat. The two had become unlikely friends, bound by shared trauma in the strange intimacy of surviving together. Emily was helping Tyler process his father's imprisonment. Tyler was helping Emily navigate college applications and financial aid forms. 2 broken people helping each other stay glued together. Emily got out, her face carefully composed but her eyes red from recent tears. You're really leaving. I'm really leaving. Can't convince you to stay? Not even for the memorial dedication next week? Sarah shook her head. I don't need a plaque to remember what happened. And I don't need a ceremony to know what Frank and my father stood for. Tyler climbed out of the car, taller than Sarah remembered, filling out into the man he'd become. The terrified boy who'd wet himself with a gun to his head was gone, replaced by someone older and sadder, and maybe a little bit wiser. Miss Mitchell, I wanted to thank you before you left, for saving my life, for giving my dad a chance to be the father he should have been. Sarah felt her throat tighten. You don't owe me thanks, Tyler. Your dad saved you. I just provided covering fire. He says you taught him what courage looks like. Says watching you stand up to Vincent when you could have walked away showed him what kind of man he wanted to be. Your father was always that man. He just forgot for a while. Sometimes it takes a crisis to remember who we really are. Emily moved closer, her voice dropping to something private. What are we supposed to do without you? You're the strongest person I know. The bravest. How are we supposed to keep going when you're gone? Sarah thought about the question. About strength and courage and what those words really meant. About her father dying on a road in Afghanistan and Frank bleeding out on a diner floor and all the warriors throughout history who'd stood their ground knowing they wouldn't survive. You do what everyone does. You wake up. You put one foot in front of the other. You carry the weight because the alternative is putting it down. And putting it down means the people who died did it for nothing. That's not enough. It's all there is. Emily pulled an envelope from her jacket, pressed it into Sarah's hand. We wrote you something, all of us. Me, Tyler, some of the people from town, people whose lives you changed. We wanted you to have it, to know what you mean to us. Sarah looked at the envelope, thick with pages, and felt tears threatening. I can't read this now. Then read it later, when you're wherever you're going, when you need to remember that you mattered. They hugged, the 3 of them, standing in the motel parking lot while cars passed and strangers stared, and the world continued not caring about their pain. When they separated, Sarah climbed into her truck before she could change her mind. Take care of each other. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. You too, take care of yourself. Sarah drove away without looking back, knowing that if she saw them in the rearview mirror, she'd lose her nerve. Would turn around and stay and let herself be pulled into a life she didn't know how to live. Better to leave clean. Better to disappear while she still had the strength. The highway stretched west, threading through mountains still capped with snow, through valleys where rivers ran high with spring runoff. Sarah drove for hours without stopping, pushing the old truck to its limits, running from ghosts she knew she'd never outpace. She didn't open Emily's envelope until she crossed into Idaho, pulling into a rest stop overlooking a lake that reflected clouds like a mirror. The envelope contained letters, dozens of them, handwritten notes on lined paper and typed documents and cards decorated with children's drawings. Sarah read them one by one, each message adding weight to the thing growing in her chest. From the elderly couple who'd been in the diner that night, "You showed us that good people still exist. That courage isn't dead. Our grandson is joining the army because of you. He wants to serve, to protect, to be like you." From a woman Sarah didn't recognize, "My sister was one of the girls the FBI rescued from Vincent's network. She's alive because you stood up, because you fought. I can never repay you, but I pray God blesses you every day for the rest of your life." From Marcus Dalton, written on prison stationery in careful script, "I don't expect forgiveness, don't deserve it, but I want you to know that watching you stand your ground when I'd spent 5 years backing down taught me something about honor, about what it means to be a man. I'm trying to be better. For Tyler, for myself, for the memory of Frank Morrison and your father. Thank you for showing me it's never too late to do the right thing." From Tyler, "You're the reason I still have a dent, not because you saved his life, but because you showed him how to live it. He's different now, better, and that's because of you." From Emily, written in purple ink with hearts dotting the I's, "You told me I mattered, that I was worth protecting. Nobody ever said that to me before. Every day since, I wake up and remember that Sarah Mitchell thought I was worth dying for. And if you thought that, maybe it's true. Maybe I do matter. Maybe my life can mean something. You gave me that gift. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to deserve it." Sarah read until the words blurred. Read until her chest ached and her hands shook, and she understood with terrible clarity that she couldn't run from this, couldn't disappear into anonymity and pretend the firefight at Mercy's diner hadn't happened. Because it had happened, and it mattered, and these people needed it to matter. Her father's voice echoed in memory, words he'd spoken when she was 14 and struggling with whether to try out for the soccer team despite knowing she probably wasn't good enough. "Being afraid of failing isn't a reason not to try, Sarah. The only real failure is not showing up." She'd shown up at Mercy's diner, had stood beside Frank Morrison when she could have driven away. And now she had to show up to the aftermath, had to face the consequences of being someone's hero even when she didn't feel heroic. Sarah pulled out her phone and called Patricia Chen, the lawyer who defended her through the grand jury hearing. "Patricia, it's Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah, good to hear from you. Where are you?" "Idaho, heading west, but I'm thinking maybe I should turn around." "What changed your mind?" "I don't know. Everything. Nothing. I just realized I can't keep running from who I am." Patricia's voice was warm. "Who are you, Sarah?" "I'm Tom Mitchell's daughter, Frank Morrison's student, Emily Parker's protector. I'm a warrior who's trying to figure out how to live in a world that doesn't need warriors anymore." "The world always needs warriors, Sarah, just not always the kind with guns. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones we fight against ourselves, against our own fear and doubt and the voice that says we're not good enough." Sarah looked at the lake, at the perfect reflection of clouds and mountains, and made a decision. "I'm coming back to Hollow Creek. I don't know what I'm going to do there. Don't know how to be the person they think I am, but I'm going to try. That's all anyone can ask." Sarah turned the truck around and drove east, back toward the town that had become the axis around which her new life would turn, back toward responsibility and legacy and the terrible burden of being remembered. The memorial dedication happened on a Saturday in late March when winter finally released its grip and spring arrived in force. The park that replaced Mercy's Diner sprawled across half an acre, with walking paths and benches and a playground where children shrieked with joy. In the center stood a granite monument, 10 feet tall, with the names of Frank Morrison and Thomas Mitchell carved in letters you could read from 20 yards away. Below their names, a quote from Shakespeare, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once." Sarah stood at the back of the crowd while the mayor gave a speech about courage and sacrifice in the American spirit, while Emily read a poem she'd written about heroes in darkness and the people who stand in the gap, while Tyler Dalton, speaking on behalf of his imprisoned father, thanked the community for giving his family a chance at redemption. Then Agent Carter stepped to the microphone, his face solemn. We're here today to honor two men, two warriors, Colonel Frank Morrison and Sergeant Tom Mitchell. They served different wars, different branches, different generations, but they shared something essential. They understood that freedom isn't free, that safety requires sacrifice, that good people must be willing to stand against evil, even when the cost is everything. He paused, looking directly at Sarah. But we're also here to honor someone else, someone who learned from these men, who carried their lessons forward, who proved that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and standing anyway. Sarah felt every eye in the crowd turn toward her. Sarah Mitchell, would you please join me? She wanted to run, wanted to disappear into the crowd and pretend she was just another face. But Emily was looking at her with hope, Tyler with gratitude, 100 strangers with expectations she didn't know how to meet. Sarah walked to the monument on legs that felt uncertain, her father's jacket heavy on her shoulders. Carter handed her a folded flag, the same kind that had draped her father's coffin 16 years ago. This flag flew over the U.S. Capitol in honor of Frank Morrison and Tom Mitchell. It's yours now, along with something else. He produced two medals from a wooden box. Purple Hearts, the kind given to warriors wounded in service to their country. These belong to your father and to Frank. Their families wanted you to have them, wanted you to carry forward the legacy of men who gave everything so others could be free. Sarah took the medals, their weight impossibly heavy in her palm, felt the crowd's expectation pressing down like gravity. Carter's voice was gentle. Do you have anything you'd like to say? Sarah looked at the monument, at her father's name beside Frank's, at the quote about courage and death. She thought about all the words she'd rehearsed in her head during the drive back. Profound statements about honor and duty and sacrifice. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was simpler, truer. My father used to tell me that being a soldier wasn't about killing enemies. It was about protecting innocence, about standing between the darkness and the people who couldn't defend themselves. Her voice carried across the silent crowd. I didn't understand that when I was 12, didn't understand it when I joined the Navy, didn't really understand it until I walked into Mercy's Diner 6 months ago and met a man who'd spent his whole life standing in that gap. Sarah touched Frank's name on the monument. Frank Morrison taught me what my father tried to teach me. That courage isn't about being unafraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified, even when the odds are impossible, even when you know it might cost everything. She turned to face the crowd. I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who showed up when someone needed help. That's all any of us can do. Show up, stand up, hold the line for as long as we can, and then pass the duty to the next person willing to carry it. Emily was crying openly now. Tyler had his arm around her shoulders. In the crowd, Sarah saw faces she recognized from the diner. Survivors and witnesses, and people whose lives had been changed by one night of violence. So I'm asking all of you, don't remember me. Don't build monuments or write stories or make me into something I'm not. Instead, remember what these two men stood for. Remember that evil exists, that it preys on the weak, that it counts on good people doing nothing. Sarah raised her voice, letting it carry. And then do something. Stand up to bullies, protect the vulnerable, speak truth to power. Be the person who shows up when someone needs help. That's how we honor Frank Morrison and Tom Mitchell. Not with granite and speeches, but by living the way they lived, by being willing to sacrifice for others, by holding the line. She stepped back from the microphone, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. The crowd was silent for a long moment. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the applause swept through the gathering like a wave, people on their feet, honoring not her, but the men whose names were carved in stone. Sarah saluted the monument one final time and walked away through the crowd. People reached out to touch her shoulder, to shake her hand, to thank her for things she didn't think she deserved thanks for. She accepted it all with as much grace as she could manage, overwhelmed and uncomfortable and grateful all at once. Emily caught up to her at the park's edge. That was beautiful, what you said. I meant every word. I know. That's why it was beautiful. Emily hesitated. What are you going to do now that you're staying? Sarah looked back at the monument, at the crowd dispersing, at the children already playing on the swings and slides built on ground where she'd killed men 6 months ago. I don't know, maybe I'll open a gym, teach self-defense, give people tools to protect themselves. Frank would like that. Yeah, I think he would. They walked together toward the parking lot, two survivors navigating a world that had tried to break them and failed. The sun was warm on Sarah's face. Spring was coming, and for the first time in 6 months, Sarah felt something that might have been hope. 3 months later, Sarah stood in an empty warehouse on the edge of Hollow Creek, surveying the space that would become Morrison's Defense Academy. Named for Frank, funded by a veterans charity that had reached out after the memorial dedication, designed to give women and girls the skills to protect themselves. Emily was helping her paint the walls, both of them covered in primer dust, and laughing about something stupid Tyler had said. Marcus called from prison every week, offering advice on building codes and business licenses and how to navigate small-town politics. Agent Carter had connected her with instructors from various martial arts backgrounds, willing to teach seminars. It was coming together, slowly, imperfectly, but coming together. The bell over the door chimed and a woman entered, maybe 40 years old, with nervous eyes and a fresh bruise on her jaw that makeup couldn't quite cover. "I saw your flyer at the grocery store about self-defense classes." Sarah set down her paint roller. "Classes don't start for another month. We're still getting set up." "Oh, I understand. I can come back." The woman turned to leave, and Sarah saw something in the slope of her shoulders. Recognition of someone who'd learned to make themselves small, to take up less space, to apologize for existing. "Wait." The woman stopped. "What's your name?" Jennifer Walsh." "Jennifer, why do you want to learn self-defense?" The question hung in the air. Jennifer's hand drifted to the bruise on her jaw, then dropped. "My husband. He gets angry sometimes, drinks. I keep thinking maybe if I could defend myself, maybe he'd stop." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. The same calculation she'd made 6 months ago looking at Emily Parker. The same recognition of evil hiding in plain sight. "Jennifer, have you called the police?" "He is the police. Deputy Sheriff. Says nobody will believe me if I report him." The words triggered something visceral in Sarah. Rage and disgust and the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Some things never changed. Some fights were never over. Evil just wore different faces, and you either stood against it or you became complicit through silence. "Jennifer, I'm going to help you, not in a month, right now, today. And not just with self-defense, with everything. Getting you somewhere safe, filing reports with the state police, making sure your husband faces consequences." Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "Why, you don't even know me." Sarah thought about her father, about Frank Morrison, about every warrior who'd ever stood in the gap between darkness and light. Because someone once stood up for a girl who needed help. And she taught me that's what we do. We stand up. We protect people who can't protect themselves. We hold the line. She pulled out her phone and called Patricia Chen, the lawyer who'd defended her, called Agent Carter at the FBI, called Marcus in prison and asked for the names of honest cops in the state police. Made call after call while Jennifer sat on a paint can and cried, and Emily held her hand. By evening, Jennifer was in a women's shelter 3 counties away. Her husband was under investigation, and Sarah had found her mission. Emily watched her make the last call, her expression thoughtful. "You're going to do this, aren't you? Make this place about more than just teaching punches and kicks. You're going to make it about saving people." Sarah looked around the warehouse, imagining what it could become. Not just a gym, but a sanctuary. A place where broken people could learn to be whole again. Where victims could become survivors. Where the cycle of violence could be interrupted by someone willing to stand in the gap. "Someone has to. Why does it have to be you?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the firefight at Mercy's Diner, the smile felt genuine. "Because I'm Tom Mitchell's daughter. Because Frank Morrison taught me what that means. And because if not me, then who?" She looked at the empty space, seeing it transformed, seeing women learning to fight back, seeing children discovering they were stronger than they knew, seeing a future where she could honor her father's memory and Frank's sacrifice, not through violence, but through protection. The last mission, the one that mattered most, not fighting wars in distant countries, but fighting the small battles at home, the quiet evils that happened behind closed doors, the predators who counted on silence and fear, and good people looking away. Sarah Mitchell had learned to be a warrior in the Navy, had learned to kill with precision and efficiency, but Frank Morrison had taught her something more important, that the truest battles weren't fought with guns. They were fought with courage and compassion, and the stubborn refusal to let evil win. Outside, the sun set over Hollow Creek, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the warehouse that would become Morrison's Defense Academy, Sarah Mitchell began the work of building something that would outlast her. A legacy not of violence but of protection, not of death but of life. Her father would have been proud. Frank Morrison would have been proud. And Sarah was finally learning to be proud of herself. The line was held. The mission continued. And in a small town in Wyoming, one warrior at a time, the darkness was being pushed back by people who refused to quit. People who showed up. People who stood up. People who held the line. Always. Fellow patriots and veterans. This story hit me hard while researching Frank Morrison's life. Here was a 68-year-old warrior, same age as many of you watching, who refused to let evil win in his town. He could have looked away, could have retired quietly. But he stood up. Sarah's journey mirrors so many Gold Star children I've met, angry at a father who chose duty, only to finally understand that sacrifice years too late. Question for you. Have you ever had a Frank Morrison moment where you had to choose between safety and doing what's right? Drop your story below. I read every single comment, and if you're a veteran carrying guilt like Frank did for 16 years, brother, sister, it's time to let it go. You did your best, that's enough. New military story drops next Friday. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. God bless you all, and God bless America. Your storyteller, keeping these heroes alive one tale at a time.